It's Friday, April 28th, 2017. Right now it is about 6:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it is day 2 of the NFL Draft, second round. The Seahawks moved down into the second round, and they have made 2 second-round picks today, making several moves down, selecting defensive tackle Malik McDowell out of Michigan State and guard center, maybe tackle Ethan Pocic out of LSU. Myself, Kenneth Arthur of fieldgoals.com, and Rob Staton of SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Now checking in live, as we were meant to do yesterday, but the Seahawks had other plans. Checking in live to talk about the Seahawks picks as they happen. We've been doing 3,000 NFL mock draft all year, waiting up to this moment when the Seahawks would actually add new players. If you're just joining us, Malik McDowell and Ethan Pocic being the Seahawks' latest new additions. And Rob, we didn't talk much about Ethan Pocic. We did talk some about Malik McDowell. I guess since we're more fresh into the Ethan Pocic selection, and since people are very intrigued about what offensive linemen can actually come in and help the Seahawks next year because it's such a dire need, what are your initial thoughts on Ethan Pocic and what he could do for Seattle?
Well, it's a bit of a surprising one. He's not a guy that we spend a lot of time talking about on the blog or on the podcast or anything like that. And I think with a little bit of good reason, because look, the LSU offensive line has not been that impressive. And, you know, they had games where they would dominate up front because they're LSU, because they had Leonard Fournette. And then whenever they played Alabama, that offensive line, and look, they're not the only team that has struggled against Alabama, but in particular, those games against Bama the last couple of years, they could do nothing. And when you've got a back as talented as Leonard Fournette and he's struggling to get more than like 20 yards in a game, that's a big concern. And they basically got whipped. And it was hard to come away particularly impressed with any of them. So, you know, the Vadal Alexander type guys from a year ago, Ethan Pocic and the like, and La'el Collins, you know, was perhaps sort of the one sort of star that they had. But they've not been known for their offensive line play. So, you know, I was kind of thinking Pocic should be more of a 3rd or 4th round type of pick. He's gone in round 2. And for the second year in a row, Seahawks go D-line, O-line. I don't know where they're going to play him because he's 6'6". He's not got, you know, the incredible length that you would think, okay, he's going to be a possible tackle option for them. He's played all of the positions for LSU, so he kind of has the experience there. So he could end up as a guard, he could end up as a hedge at center, maybe even if they don't want to re-sign Justin Britt. And maybe that's what they're doing here. Maybe they're taking somebody who can replace Justin Britt down the line because they don't want to pay him $8 or $9 million. But you know, that I imagine is not going to get people excited about this pick. If you're saying, well, look, you know, we're going to suggest here that this is a potential replacement for the only offensive lineman who did pretty well last year because we don't want to pay him, then people are not going to be particularly excited about that pick. I need to do a bit more homework on him. You know, I didn't focus on him as much as other players. You know, it was a miss on my behalf on you know, not spending more time on him. His TEF score is not particularly great. It's not bad. It's one of the better ones in the class at a 2.81. I'm just looking now. He was in the top 10 for TEF. But, you know, personally, I kind of like Dorian Johnson at Pittsburgh a little bit more. I did like Isaac Asiata and what he brought from Utah. I did like Nico Siragusa. I know there's some concern about sort of his motor, but did like him as well. And saw some potential in a player like Taylor Moton as well at Western Michigan. And, you know, I kind of would have had all of those players ranked before Ethan Pocic. But, you know, that's the guy that they've gone with. And now we wait to hear from Pete Carroll and John Schneider about the player. And, you know, this... Just before, you know, to wrap this little point up here, Kenny, it's interesting because you're looking at other teams and you know, we've got to this stage in a draft now where it's hard not to be kind of more excited about what other teams are doing. So, for example, Pittsburgh have just selected Juju Smith-Schuster, who is you know, really tough, physical wide receiver, very productive from USC, and they're going to pair him with TJ Watt. And you sort of look at those 2 picks and you think, oof, you know, that's an impressive double pick there for Pittsburgh. You look at what Arizona's done in getting Hassan Reddick in the 1st round and then going and getting Budda Baker, and you think, yeah, you know, that's pretty exciting. And then you look at what the Seahawks have done. and they've got Malik McDowell and Ethan Pocic, and you think, yeah, okay, this is going to take we need to do some work on this. We need to sort of hear from them. We need to sort of work on what their thought process was. I don't think, they may prove to be very solid additions, and certainly McDowell, we're going to come on to in a minute, has got a lot of potential, but it's not going to get many people excited, I imagine, with the 2 second-round picks.
I mean, Jason Lackenfora saying that, the Seahawks see a lot of value on Pocic, and at 6'6", believe he could fit in across the offensive line, including tackle. I mean, I guess versatility and the idea that maybe he's not plugged into one role is one thing that definitely gives him an added amount of value that perhaps some of the other offensive line prospects didn't have. It's just something that the Seahawks and Pete Carroll and Tom Cable value. And then, of course, it always just every year and every day we're stirring up the Tom Cable discussions. I could have 0 of those for the rest of my life and be pretty happy about it. But overall, it's interesting just to see the Seahawks, come away with an offensive lineman and of course be one that we didn't discuss ever, maybe once or twice, but just barely ever discussed him. And we never discussed him, and now some of the fans are disgusted. But I think in the long run, what it means for Justin Britt or what it means for the other linemen, I think everybody on the offensive line knew that they were fighting for a job. And even for Justin Britt, fighting for a new contract, because he is going to the final year of his contract. Does the Seahawks want to pay him $7 to $8 million a year? I doubt it. And so for that reason, just the same reason that they moved on from Max Unger, maybe this is them beginning a competition between Joey Hunt and Pocic. Obviously, for Joey Hunt, he's not going to stand up to a second-round pick in terms of, Posic's not going anywhere. So other than another place on the offensive line, so they can have that competition and see what happens. One evaluator saying that Ethan Pocic best fits at left guard, which would make more sense too, because now you're talking about, potentially replacing Mark Lewinsky, which is, certainly a more enticing proposition than replacing Justin Britt or trying to figure out the tackle situation now that you've added Luke Jokel and Jermaine Afidi. Rob, as you look at the remaining board for the offensive line and that they've added Ethan Pocic and they've got 4 more draft picks coming today in round 3, how do you think that this move of adding a center guard versatile offensive lineman affects their next moves in this draft as it goes to the offensive line?
Well, I think, it's pretty hard to imagine they're going to go back to it. I mean, it's widely regarded as one of the weaker offensive line classes in a while. And they clearly believed that Ethan Pocic was a better option than, some of the guys at the top of the second round. They didn't take Cam Robinson and Forrest Lamp. They've taken Pocic, and that was obviously their tactic all along, assuming that there wasn't this mad rush of players they really wanted at 58. That looks as if it was their plan. So now we see, how he fits in. I mean, this is the thing, is you can overreact to something like this and say, hey, we didn't. I've noticed this on Twitter, I mean, we can provide some constructive criticism in this podcast, me and you, Kenny. But I've seen people on Twitter majorly overreacting, like throwing the baby out with the bathwater because, they didn't take this guy and they didn't do this and they traded down too many times. And by the sounds of things, they were going to take Malik McDowell, whether they were stuck at 26, stuck at 31, or moved down to 34 and then eventually 35, that they were going to take him at any of those spots anyway. So they got the guy they wanted while collecting a series of picks. They clearly like the third round because they've kept all their picks there. They haven't moved up from 58, so they must like the third round value that's on offer. They may well trade up in round 3, but they like what's there for the time being. They've made these 2 picks. It's just, I guess we will have a better idea of, as a group of fans as to whether or not we really like what they've done today in, a round's time, because if they've got 4 picks in this round, and if they use all 4 of those picks and they've got another one coming up first thing tomorrow, then it may be that some of these guys, I mean, there's still a lot of interesting players on the board, whether it's a Tim Williams, for example, whether it's Chris Wormley. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here.
Well, what do you think happened to Obi Melifonwu? They met with him 4 times. He's a perfect athlete. In, our eyes, we talked about him a lot. and they just let him slide by 2 picks ahead of them with the Raiders. Any thoughts on what may have happened there, that they were like, they weren't that, hot on him, that they grew kind of?
It's impossible to say. I mean, they may have taken him at 58 if he was there. He went 2 picks before them. Sometimes that's the way it works. There may have been somebody else who 3 picks before they chose that they would have been interested in as well. I mean, we will never know how interested they were in him. I don't think the fact that the Seahawks didn't draft Obi Melifonwu was any kind of review as to their position on him. I'm sure we'll get on to McDowell in a second, but they clearly love the potential that Malik McDowell has. Some of the things the pick in a second, but they clearly love what he brings to the table. Melifonwu wasn't there for their second pick. And they've taken Ethan Pocic, so that's the decision. Let's see what they do. I mean, I suppose you could argue that the way that this is going is that the Seahawks are not in the kind of mode that I think a lot of us presume they would be in, which was to sort of restock on defense, get a lot younger on defense at numerous positions, focus on the secondary because that's where there's a lot of strength, and go down that road. Instead they seem to be making picks to try and have another tilt this year, and maybe not thinking, let's get the next Richard Sherman, let's get the next Cam Chancellor, let's get the next Earl Thomas, let's get the next whoever, KJ Wright. It seems like they're more likely thinking, okay, we've got all those guys. Now let's get a couple of players that can support them and help us, reload and go again this year. And they're getting younger on defense, especially on the defensive line. So you've now got Jaron Reed, you've got Frank Clark, you've got Malik McDowell that form the next 5 or 6 years of the D-line in Seattle. And that could be the focus rather than the secondary going forward. Who knows? I mean, that's where they've invested a lot of stock now.
Well, let's walk it back then and talk about Malik McDowell, since we haven't had a chance to do that yet. The Seahawks moved down from 26 to 31, and they pick up a 3rd rounder and a 7th rounder. Then they move down from 31 to 34, and they pick up a 4th rounder from the 49ers. And then they move down from 34 to 35, and they pick up a 6th rounder from the Jaguars. And then they select Malik McDowell. Malik McDowell had a visit with the Seahawks. We wrote about it on Field Goals because it was a notable visit, because McDowell is a notable player, a top recruit coming out of high school at Michigan, chose Michigan State. I think not at the request of his family, who didn't want him to go that far from home, even though it was, in state. But McDowell, 6'6", 275 pounds. But if you would, when we talk about, 2018 mock drafts, if we talked about 2018 mock drafts right now, we'd talk about some players in the top 5 or top 10 that would not, that a year from now would not have nearly that same sort of credibility. Malik McDowell, if you'd gone a year ago, may have been one of those guys who could have been a top 5 pick. I had seen him I'd read a couple articles here and there, maybe just one that I'm now doubling to a couple, saying McDowell was in the talks for a number 1 overall pick in the draft. And that's because in 2015, as a true sophomore, when he's 19 or 20 years old, McDowell had 41 tackles, 13 tackles for a loss, 4.5 sacks, 1 interception, that he returned for a touchdown, and, just a dominant player at a young age in a real conference. And then the junior season, he has some injuries. He's not that productive. People are calling into question his character and his maturity. And suddenly, now he's the 35th overall pick in the draft, which is still pretty good. From a physical standpoint, I think that I had seen one video here on YouTube of a big, admittedly, he was a big Malik McDowell fan, but saying this guy is better than Solomon Thomas. From a physical standpoint, you could say that he's a unique defensive tackle in the mold of the guys. If there was a circle for the most exceptional defensive tackles athletically, it would include guys like Aaron Donald and Geno Atkins, and Malik McDowell would be on the next tier of that circle athletically. But Rob, he does come with these concerns about his character. There are reasons why he wasn't a top 5, top 10 pick. Out, because physically and his sophomore season, you would say, man, this guy's a special player. And maybe it's the same way with Frank Clark a couple of years ago, where, you had compared him physically to Jadeveon Clowney, but they didn't have, but they had different characters and different situations and different amounts of hype. Malik McDowell could be compared to a Solomon Thomas by some, and certainly to some of the other defensive linemen that went in the first round, but they are the character concerns. So what are your overall thoughts on the addition of Malik McDowell, and how concerned are you for that other side of him that's not about football?
I'm not particularly concerned because I trust this team, and that's the important thing here. I mean, yeah, look, we can talk about views on Malik McDowell 3 weeks ago. I mean, my opinion of McDowell was completely based on me projecting whether or not the Seahawks would be interested in this type of guy. And then you watch the interviews he does, and he's surly. He's not particularly talkative, has very little charisma. It doesn't sort of stand out for his character. And then you kind of watch the tape in 2016 and whether he was hurt or not, you see him slouching a lot. There was one play very well advertised against Michigan where the guy's, forcing his way into the end zone, the running back, and Malik McDowell's walking around in the backfield and then sort of shrugs and throws his arms up in the air and kind of stomps off. And, when you sort of look at stuff like that, you say, well, how is a Seahawks team that constantly preaches competition and competing and, has these high energy, high octane, players that have drafted continue to draft that type of player as well, and Jaron Reed and, Frank Clark. And that is what this defense is built around, these incredibly intense, physical, relentless players that are constantly pushing and competing and driving each other on. And then you look at McDowell and you think, well, that's not the Seahawks. When you watch him, that's not what he does. So, my opinion of him was not so much I hate the idea of him in Seattle. It was more a case of I don't think they're going to take him. And it was wrong. I was completely wrong on that because they'd taken him, and it's by the sounds of things, they were going to be prepared to take him at 26. So now it's a case of what is he? And why have they taken him? I think the why is quite simple. They've been looking for an inside-out rusher for a long time. I think for a good 2 or 3 years now they've been looking one. I think they perhaps were hoping that Frank Clark was going to be that guy, except he's better on the edge. So I think that they've been constantly looking for this player that can play outside, in base, and then kick inside and sub packages, and that's what they've got with Malik McDowell. When you watch him play, he is very disruptive. He's kind of got that ability to get into the backfield and disrupt plays. It's something the Seahawks haven't had, and they've watched Arizona have it with Calais Campbell. They've watched Aaron Donald have it in the Chargers. They're going to watch Solomon Thomas do that. They want a bit of the action. They want their version, quite frankly. And in Malik McDowell, at the very least, they've taken somebody who's got the potential to kind of give them that impact defensive lineman that can rush the interior, something they've not had for a long time. What he needs to improve on is his control and his discipline. One thing you often see when he attacks the offensive line is that his gap control is very poor, that yes, he's getting into the backfield, but he's attacking the wrong gap, or he's not reading the play. So he will attack the left-hand side, maybe shoot the A-gap or something, and then leave the opposite side open for a running back, and that's where the play's going. And yes, he's in the backfield, but it's completely irrelevant. He doesn't make any kind of play because his assignment is wrong. So these are little things that he's going to have to work on. As an edge rusher, he's very athletic. He's got great length. You sort of see some terrific rushes from someone who's 290 pounds off the edge. Very, very unique. But he does the same move over and over and over again. It's like an arm over swipe, and he does it constantly. And at the next level, he's going to get caught out doing that. Offensive linemen are going to second guess that all day. They're going to sort of work him out very quickly. So he's going to have to, develop his repertoire. And as a consequence of that, I don't know if we'll see the best of him as a rookie, and it might be a year or two down the line before he can become really, really effective. So, that's him as a player. I just think that you're complaining about the pick and sort of quibbling about the decision to take him is a bit of a pointless exercise. I mean, yes, there were other players that people would have wanted, and people talk about Kevin King. If he works out, he could be a Calais Campbell type of player for this team. A lot of people wanted Calais Campbell. He's earning like $13-14 million in Jacksonville right now. The Seahawks are going to get this guy at a really, really cheap price. They're building up the defensive line. How many football fans talk about, listen, it's such a cliche, it's rhetoric, but people say it all the time. Take offensive linemen, take defensive linemen, get pass rushers, get pass blockers, build in the trenches, build a team inside out, stuff like that. The Seahawks have done that essentially for like the last 3 or 4 years. And if people are going to complain about that now, then, well, don't complain when they trade a first round pick for a receiver next year then, or something like that, because that's the complete opposite. I mean, they are building this team in the trenches. They're trying to get the defensive and the offensive line right.
Definitely. Just say that it's interesting that they did go the first 2 rounds without taking a cornerback, though also not that interesting because the Seahawks and John Schneider and Pete Carroll have never taken a cornerback in the first 2 rounds. They've taken one safety, Earl Thomas in 2010, but they have never taken a cornerback in the first 2 rounds, and that didn't change this year. As we've been talking, it has flipped over to the 3rd round of the 2017 NFL draft, and the Seahawks still have 4 selections left in their cornerbacks on the board, though the San Francisco 49ers just selected Ahkello Witherspoon out of the University of Colorado.
Good. I'm glad. Can I just jump in? I'm really glad that San Francisco drafted him. And you know why, Kenny. You know what this guy's about, because we've talked about it. In coverage, he's great. Yeah. Passes defended, 2nd most in the country last year. Tedrick Thompson, the safety, was number 1 at Colorado. He was number 2. But he is terrible in run defense and on wide receiver screens. So if I'm the Seahawks right now and I'm saying, okay, we're going to play Ahkello Witherspoon and we're going to play Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster. So Reuben Foster is going to stand in the middle. Solomon Thomas is going to be in the middle, and you've got Ahkello Witherspoon outside. I am throwing, and Seahawks do this anyway, but I'm throwing wide receiver screens all day on Ahkello Witherspoon's side and saying, run at that guy, because he's allergic to contact. So the 49ers may well have got a decent cover corner, but they've got someone who will not want to put his helmet in there and make a tackle. So it's interesting the Seahawks haven't taken a corner, but if I'm more than satisfied with this situation that Ahkello Witherspoon is going to San Francisco.
Yeah, and I'll give them credit for the next pick after that is 49ers trade down with and pick up their 20th second round just to move down in the 3rd round. What do you think of that round?
The Saints, there was a report from Ian Rappaport a while ago saying the Saints were trying to move up. I don't know how deep they've moved down here, San Francisco, but Rappaport's report, that's a mouthful, said that they were willing to trade a 2nd round pick next year to move up and get a pass rusher. So I've just seen a shot of John Lynch celebrating in the war room. I imagine that the celebration is probably in part because of the pick they've just made, but also the deal that they may have just got here. If people remember, they got a very attractive deal from Chicago right at the start of the draft to swap from number 2 to number 3. And if they've got a 2nd round pick next year as well from a New Orleans team that never seems capable of getting out of its own way, I mean, they perennially seem to be 7 and 9, then that 2nd round pick could be pretty valuable in a year's time. And yeah, it's an interesting move. I'm going to try. I mean, I don't know about what you're watching, Kenny, but I didn't know the Witherspoon pick until I've got it live on the TV here. And I think if you're on social media, I hate tipping picks, quite frankly. And I'm trying to watch it on the telly. I don't know if other people want the picks to be tipped. I hate the fact that Twitter ruins the draft in many ways. But I'm not going to mention any of the picks until they see them on the screen, if that's okay.
Fair enough. I can't tell anymore. If you can mute your mic real quick. I can't tell anymore just because it just seems like this year especially, they are 4 or 5 picks behind, because even if you look at the back of the screen there on, I'm looking at NFL Network, and if you look at the back of the screen, on the front of the screen in the graphic, it says the pick is in at 67. But in the back, on the actual monitor, it shows you that the Rams were on the clock. So it's like they're announcing the pick for the Saints, but now the Jets are on the clock, 4:36. So really, the Jets are the team that are on the clock, and that's not for another 4 picks right now, respective of the graphic.
Yeah, it's been a horror show. I mean, I think that the way they've done it this year has been they've just had so much delaying going on. This backlog of picks that started about pick 21 last night has just carried on today. as they introduce numerous people, and it just makes it really stodgy. So many adverts as well. The last pick was New Orleans at 67, Alvin Kamara, which is a really interesting pick and worth touching on because they moved up. You're saying they moved up and swapped with San Francisco, I mean, I've not seen any details on a deal or anything yet, but if they did, to get Alvin Kamara, they've just signed Adrian Peterson and they've already got Mark Ingram. So they've essentially got all the running backs now. I mean, that's a, how the problem with Adrian Peterson, he's going to want most of the touches. And now you've spent a second-round pick on Alvin Kamara, and you've already got Mark Ingram there. Now, whether or not they move Mark Ingram over the next day or two, we'll have to wait and see on that. I think this is a very curious strategy so far from New Orleans. And the other thing with them is that their main needs are on defense, and they've now spent a third-round pick on Alvin Kamara and a first-round pick on Ryan Ramczyk. So it's a lot of offense there.
This would be a good time probably to discuss the fact that the Seahawks are, they still have 4 more picks today. Their next pick is at pick 90, and right now we're just at pick 68 on the graphic, but really more like pick 70. So there's about 20 more players to come off the board, maybe 19 more players to come off the board before the Seahawks' next pick. And I'm still interested in, because this is, Rob, you weren't able to make it last night because the Seahawks never made a pick, but I spent 37 minutes just sort of talking about my thoughts to nobody at all. And those who want to hear that, I guess it's like an Easter egg because I didn't upload it to the podcast, but it's out there on YouTube and it's in our draft results show yesterday. It was just 37 minutes of me talking about the picks that had happened and what Seattle could do. But, I still don't understand how they're going to add 6 players on days 1 and 2 because there's, and not only that, but the early 4th round picks. So we've seen them move on from 4th round picks as rookies. We've seen them do that with guys like Chris Harper or whatever, where they're like, we gave it a go and we were wrong. And it happens around the NFL. But I think in that first 3 rounds, almost anybody, like 99% of those guys are making the roster. So I just don't see how they add 6, if not 7 guys at that position of the top 100 or so picks where it's really going to get tough competitions. Do they have that many spots? So I could see them taking the opportunity at any of these points to move up, or maybe like move in, trade a 3rd round pick for a 2018 2nd round pick. But I'm still waiting to find out what they're going to do there. But the best players available left on the board, as the Seahawks have some time to go here, and I'm just going off of NFL.com's updated list of their best players available, and by far the one that stands out is Jordan Willis, defensive end at Kansas State, who is their 40th ranked player, and again we're approaching pick 70. So Jordan Willis, Chris Wormley, another defensive lineman, this one out of Michigan, who may fit the physical needs. And I'm just kind of looking at players: Dorian Johnson, Deshaun Hall, the defensive end out of Texas A&M, Jordan Lewis, cornerback out of Michigan, Cooper Kupp, receiver out of Eastern Washington, and so on and so forth. Davis Webb, the quarterback, of course, that they met with. Josh Dobbs, another quarterback. Lots of talk about the Seahawks taking quarterback in the 3rd round. Isaac Asiata, Zach Banner. Rob, when you look at the list of best available players and 20 picks to go, is there anyone that you would want to trade up for if you could at this point? Or is the board looking so good to you in such a way right now that you wait that 20 and you take your 4 players?
Good question. I can look through now and see who's there. I mean, there are some interesting names still on the board, some big names. I think when you look at the receiver position, there are players like Chris Godwin who could become interesting, Tywan Taylor, if they wanted to add a receiver. But then I really like Joe Chesson, a player that we talked about an awful lot a long time ago. Malachi Dupree is another one. So there's probably like options there if you want to go receiver a little bit later on, especially with the 4-5 picks you've got coming up in a short space of time, that those guys will be available in that range. So maybe you sort of push receiver to one side for the time being. At the tight end, I think Bucky Hodges is an interesting player. Is maybe a little bit raw, not quite as good as some of the others. You could take a redshirt option on Jake Butt, who's got a lot of talent, but has got this knee injury that he suffered in the Orange Bowl. And then you've got George Kittle, who's a very athletic tight end, and maybe they're going to need another tight end to just come in and compete, especially with Luke Wilson and Jimmy Graham out of contract next year. So there's a few names there. On the offensive line, I think there are still some pretty intriguing options. You've got people like Dan Feeney, who's still there, but are they going to take another guard? Almost certainly not. I think Dorian Johnson's a good player. Nico Siragusa, Isaac Casiata that I mentioned there, but there are some options that you maybe consider if you get to pick 90 and they're still there, but I'm not sure you'd be trading up for another offensive lineman. I think that, you've made your bed on that position essentially. Defensive line, so they've already taken Malik McDowell. I'm looking across here. I wouldn't have really been interested in Caleb Brantley even before what happened to him, and I think he's probably going to go undrafted. Deshaun Hall, very interesting player from Texas A&M, edge rusher, someone they might be interested in. Chris Wormley, solid but not spectacular, but perhaps better than, he's still on the board at this stage, perhaps better than he's going to go. Carlos Watkins is a player that they might show a lot of interest in. Derek Rivers is a possibility. Jeremiah Ledbetter at Arkansas, names that might interest this team, because there's a lot of explosive defensive linemen in this draft. Tim Williams, look, if someone's going to take a chance on Tim Williams at some point, clearly the character issues are the big issue there. He didn't have a great combine. I think there's question marks over why is he not in better shape? Why was he not in better shape at the combine? Because he's a player who should be fast and twitchy and quick, and he wasn't. So, there's some concern. I think this is perfectly understandable why Jordan Willis is still available, because he's very athletic, tested well at the combine. You don't see it on tape. Struggles to get off blocks. There are good linebacker options still on the board. I guess the two positions that people are going to want us to focus on most are the two defensive back positions. Rasul Douglas, not quite as fast, hasn't really got the wingspan that they look for, but had 8 interceptions, playmaker. Fabian Moreau could be someone you work on in the slot. He's got a torn pectoral muscle at the moment. He's falling because of that. I really like Cordrea Tankersley, but he's still on the board there. Jordan Lewis. Now, if you're talking about a player to move up and get, Jordan Lewis might be someone to consider there. Really gritty, works well in the slot. You can trust him to go and work in that position quite quickly. So I think Jordan Lewis could be somebody that they move up and take a look at there in terms of cornerbacks. They're running out of cornerbacks. There's not that many left. And then you look at safety position. Rayshawn Jenkins is a player that I really like, but is the third round a little steep for him? Maybe. I also like Shalom Luani, and I like him a little bit more than I think a lot of other people do. So there are the names I'm looking at. To finally answer your question, Kenny, there aren't many players that I would be thinking at this point move up and get them, unless you really believe that it's time to stop the drop for someone like Tim Williams or a Jordan Willis, and you just think, look, it's worth taking them. And a quick final point on Jordan Willis. It's understandable why he's in this range, but sometimes it's worth taking a chance on a player in the third round who's a very athletic pass rusher, because to give you two names who have dropped to the third round and have really succeeded, having gone in that range and have tested quite well, but for some reason have fallen. Justin Houston, who was at Georgia, who went to Kansas City, was a third round pick, has had a tremendous career. And Cliff Averill in Detroit and now Seattle was a third rounder as well from Purdue. Both had really good careers. So maybe Jordan Willis is somebody that in this third round you consider moving up for.
Yeah. In terms of Forrest Lamp, also, just going back a little bit again, Mike Mayock said that if Forrest Lamp was on the board at 26, the Seahawks should run to the podium or whatever. The Seahawks passed on him at 26. They passed on him at 31. They passed on him at 34, and they passed on him at 35, and Forrest Lamp goes to the Chargers at 38. And there's a scenario in which maybe the Seahawks take Forrest Lamp at 35, and then with pick 58, they don't take Ethan Pocic. They take whatever, Chidobe Awuzie or Tano Kapasigian or, someone else that's maybe a defensive lineman that would have helped them in that area. We had done this sort of similar thought experiment with Joel Bitonio and Jarvis Landry back in 2014. And you liked Joel Bitonio quite a bit, and they passed on him, and it was a very similar situation. So I'm just kind of curious as well to your thoughts on Forrest Lamp. Some people had talked about him in the vein of, Nick Martin or Zach Martin and saying that's the kind of player he is, that he'll be a great guard. But a lot of teams pass on him, not just the Seahawks, and the Seahawks did pass on him 3 times, kind of. What are your end thoughts on Forrest Lamp? Do you think that'll be, compared to taking Pocic at the end of the second round, would you have thought Forrest Lamp at the top of the second round would have been better? What were your overall thoughts on them passing on Lamp?
I really wasn't bothered by that at all. Forrest Lamp was the best tester. He was the most explosive offensive lineman at the combine. But I always kind of felt like people were overstating the Alabama game that he had. And well, he had a good game against Alabama, but I think we were watching the highlights maybe as he was picked, or it was highlights just before, and it was saying, he dominated. That was it. It was in the Brett Coleman mock draft that he was saying he dominated Alabama, absolutely dominated, took over the game, and was saying stuff like this. And that was a bit of a stretch. This was overstating how he played against Alabama. He had a solid game, and he's from Western Kentucky, and he had a solid game against a really talented Alabama defensive line. So, yep. You say, well done. You give him a lot of credit for that. It pays off a lot in terms of how you're judging him as a player. But don't over-egg the pudding here. Let's not say that he's suddenly this really fantastic player as a consequence. I always felt like, and we were really consistent throughout the season with this, Kenny, Garrett Bowles was the best offensive lineman in this draft class. And so it proved. He was the first one off the board. He was the only one who went in the top 20. He would have gone a lot earlier if he didn't have this age thing. I imagine this 24 years turning on 25. I think if it was 21, probably goes top 10, 15. So he goes first, as we kind of expected all along. And Ryan Ramczyk fell because he's injured and he's not done any testing, and he goes 32nd overall. Was never a big fan of Cam Robinson, and always kind of felt that Forrest Lamp's value was in that 30 to 40 kind of range. I did a big board that I published on Twitter, if people want to go back and check that out. And I put him in the 4th tier of this big board. So that was kind of looking at, it was in that sort of 30-ish, 30 to 35 kind of range. And, that's the range ultimately that he went in. So it wasn't a big surprise. He had 32-inch arms, which is quite short arm length. The Seahawks have only drafted one offensive lineman in the Pete Carroll era with 32-inch arms, and that was Joey Hunt in the 6th round a year ago. It's a 6th-round pick, backup center. It's a throwaway pick at that point. It's a bit of a difference between that and making it the first pick in the draft. And the other thing is that you bring another Western Kentucky offensive lineman and a rookie, and you bring him in and you say, okay, we're going to start this guy next year, and we're going to put him in there. You're not sort of contributing to some of the issues you've already had in the past, that, you've been too young up front, maybe not quite had that sort of major experience. And at least with Ethan Pocic, he's been playing in the SEC for LSU, big games, big conference, and maybe is a bit more battle hardened and ready to come into the league as well. So I wasn't concerned about passing on Forrest Lamp. I have absolutely no issues whatsoever with the Malik McDowell pick. I want to watch more Pocic to see if, to see what he's all about. I want to see what they're going to do in round 3. This is potentially a very exciting round with 4 picks here. I want to see what they're going to do. But I have no issue whatsoever with the McDowell pick. They are taking a chance on upside and getting a consistent, solid player out of McDowell. We've been sort of all clamoring for an interior rusher for a long time. That's what McDowell's going to bring them. And if he can be disruptive in the way that some of these other guys are in the NFC West, could be a really nice pick. Look, Seahawks won a Super Bowl in 2013 with a really, really strong, deep defensive line. And it looks as if they're committing a little bit towards that again. Jaron Reed last year, round 2. Malik McDowell, round 2 this year. Quinton Jefferson will hopefully come back as well. You've only got Frank Clark in there. Bennett, Averill going to stick around. So you've got Marsh and other players too. So look, it seems like there's a commitment to the D-line, and I have absolutely no issues with that at all. And I'm not looking at Lamp and Robinson and thinking they're the ones that got away. Some of the defensive backs were attractive, but look, they're taking a chance on McDowell. I'm happy to see how it pans out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you just in that vein, just the Seahawks last season, I believe had 1.5 sacks from their defensive tackles. Someone pointed that out on Twitter, also bringing that up again, and that Clint McDonald alone had 5.5 sacks in 2013. So it's not just bringing pressure from the outside, and the Seahawks themselves are often victims of people and teams bringing pressure from the inside, like Aaron Donald and K'Wan Short and that kind of stuff. So Jaron Reed had 1.5 sacks last year, and that was their only sacks from a defensive tackle. So if you're pairing Jaron Reed and looking towards the future there with Reed, McDowell, Frank Clark, Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, obviously Bennett and Averill would be sort of like near the end of that, future somewhere. Maybe they're not involved in the long-term play, but still not old or anything. So next year, and it's hard to disprove the idea that defensive line, pass rush, getting pressure on the quarterback is something that is extremely. There's no way I think you can't paint the Malik McDowell pick as not exciting. It's by definition exciting because it's not guaranteed, but the upside is there for him to be one of the top 5 defensive tackles, pass rushing defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen in the NFL, I think. So certainly in that terms, getting that at 35 is very exciting. And they had a private visit with Malik McDowell. So they had checked their own boxes and said, we know this kid. And obviously teams are wrong, and sometimes fans get lucky and are right. But for the most part, 99.9% of the fans, they don't know who this guy is from a personal standpoint, and so that's something that we'll find out as time goes on, because I think you could have argued for a lot. And look, there's 90-man rosters. There are thousands of people in the NFL. It's impossible to build a 53-man roster without guys that you couldn't pick apart for, their character or motivation or effort or whatever. So we'll find out. When I was going to college, when I was in high school, I'll tell, an anecdote, kind of an anecdote, but when I was in high school, I didn't get good grades. I was in the principal's office all the time. I had a very low GPA. I don't know if I was lucky to graduate, but, I was probably towing the line. I never failed the class, but I was probably towing the line all the time. Got suspended for a week once. I mean, I wasn't that great of a student or, someone that you'd want around school. But when I went to college that first year, because I went to a community college to begin, a BCC represent, but I started, my dad gave me a little bit of money, but then I was really starting to pay for this. And I shaped up immediately. There's something to that, to being said that, as soon as I was in college and it was money out of my pocket and there was actually more of an investment there, I became a much better student, much better person that you'd want to have in a classroom. I was the type of person that was looking at the types of me in high school and being like, shut up, I'm trying to learn. And suddenly, sometimes when things get more serious, people get more serious. And if you're a college player, I think sometimes that can also, work for and against certain guys, is the fact that this is a new ball game, and now it is about the money in your pocket, and you do have to pay. You have to play to get paid. And so Malik McDowell can come in and this is true of any prospect coming in, you can take it. You can take your rookie contract. You can feel comfortable that you've made some money off of football. And maybe that's all you want to do is say you've made some money off of football and you're just not that into it. But I think a lot of guys are just like, oh, this is now my livelihood. This is how I'm going to, put food on the table, which may sound like an exaggeration, but we have seen a lot of these guys go broke, and, there's a lot of hidden things going on in terms of payment. So that's what it's going to come down to. I think everybody changes it to some degree when they get drafted into professional sports or, start becoming a professional in anything. So, that's the sort of type of character we'll find out that nobody can possibly know yet.
Yeah, and easy. A couple of things. Easy to forget that at the start of the college season, he was being tipped to be a top 10 pick, Malik McDowell. He even was asked, what are your thoughts on the NFL? And he said, well, I will only declare for the draft if I'm going to go in the top 10. If I'm not going in the top 10, then I'm not going to declare. He was even asked about that quote when he was on the red carpet yesterday. So he basically said, I've changed my mind and, had a different perspective on it. And that's almost certainly because Michigan State completely collapsed last year, and he didn't want to go back for another wasted year because it was time to go in the NFL. He's only 20 years old. But a lot of people thought he was going to be a top 10 pick, and he's gone, 35 in the end to the Seahawks. And if they get that, that's the kind of talent he's got. And it was a bit, it's fairly similar to Calais Campbell. When Calais Campbell, I think it was 2008 that he entered the league, I think. he fell quite a lot and went in a similar range, and was always looked like he had a lot to his game at Miami, and fell, and then has ended up having this terrific career. And maybe the Seahawks see a bit of that in Malik McDowell. So hopefully there's going to be some potential there for him to have a really good career in Seattle. A couple of other things, Kenny. There's been some players coming off the board. Jordan Willis has just gone to Cincinnati, a player that we talked about a moment ago. So there'll be no chance of getting him now. Bengals have drafted Joe Mixon and Jordan Willis and John Ross. A very interesting 3 players there for them. Very athletic for sure. And Taywan Taylor, the receiver's gone as well. So he's no longer going to be an option for the Seahawks. It's kind of getting to a point now where I think we all kind of expected them at some point to move up, given all the stock they've got. Can only presume that they really, really like the third round range. And we heard from John Schneider just before the draft, and he was kind of asked about the class, and he was, there are ranges we want to pick in, but it's not a really thick draft. There's not thickness throughout every round. And yet, what have they done since the draft started? Try and acquire more picks, and they've got these big chunk of picks coming up. 5 picks in a very short space of time. And hopefully there's going to be more KJ Wright, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman types in that group than Nick Vanetz and Jordan Hill and players like that. So big opportunity for the Seahawks coming up in a few picks' time.
Yeah, they've just to go over a couple of the other picks. Cooper Kupp to the Rams. So Cooper Kupp is coming into the NFC West, and he'll be another player for the Rams. The Rams have added Robert Woods. In the second round, they drafted the tight end, Gerald Everett out of South Alabama. So they're trying to get more, help to Jared Goff, obviously, and then adding Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, one of the most, the most productive receiver in, NCAA history at that level, at least, probably both levels. And has good size and everything like that, but was downgraded for obviously playing in Eastern Washington and maybe not being the quickest guy on the field. But overall, he was very intriguing to me, and now he goes to the Rams. Any thoughts there on the Rams selection of Cooper Kupp, since it's someone that the Seahawks will be facing perhaps twice a year, and and the Rams already giving the Seahawks problems because they didn't have that first round pick?
No, not concerned at all by the Rams' 2 picks. A tight end from South Alabama with 8-inch hands. He's very athletic, and they do need to put weapons around around Jared Goff. But the Rams have kind of made the bed, and they're going to have to sleep in it now. As soon as you trade up what you did for Goff, and you give away what essentially ended up being the number 5 overall pick. You have to handle that, and I just wonder. There's new people in that building now. Would Sean McVay, looking at the draft class this year, would he have rather have been number 5 overall this year in a position to take Pat Mahomes, for example, or would he rather have been lumbered with Jared Goff? So I think he'd probably I'd rather work with Pat Mahomes. That's for sure. I would much rather have Mahomes as the QB of the future than Jared Goff. So they put the tight end in there, small school tight end. They put a small school wide receiver in there, and Cooper Kupp, who didn't have the greatest workout. I'm not. That does not seem particularly threatening to me. They're having to build something, and they're not having the kind of impact draft that other teams are. I think that Arizona, for me, are the ones out of the NFC West that have improved themselves the most. They lost a lot of defensive players in free agency, and now they're getting really, really good player. Hassan Reddick, talked loads about him. Really, really special linebacker, edge rusher, can wear many different hats. Really exceptional player. And then Budda Baker, who we all know about, is just going to roam around, is going to make plays. They love those kind of hybrid safety cornerback type players. They've got another one of those. So very impressive from the Arizona Cardinals so far.
Are there any other teams that you're overly impressed with? Obviously, the Cleveland Browns had a ton. Actually, before we get to that, I remember I had a question earlier. Just sort of a thought. Would you rather have the Saints draft picks, not necessarily the players, but just the draft picks? The Saints picked at 11 and 32. So they had 2 first-round picks, even though, the first one was not quite top 10, but, it's a decent pick. And we're talking about this particular class. So, you've got the Saints pick at 11, and they got their pick at 32. They had their own second-round pick at 42, and then they moved up in the 3rd round or whatever. Or would you rather have the Seahawks draft, which is, in this scenario now, no first-round picks, but they've got 2 seconds and 4 thirds, and they've got a 4th, and they've got 2 sixths, and they've got 2 sevenths. So they got a lot to work with later on. Would you rather have those, especially in this class, would you rather have the Saints with those 2 particular first-round picks and then work with what you got the rest of the way, 2nd, 3rd round? Or would you rather have the Seahawks, who didn't have any first-round picks but have a lot of capital on day 2 and towards the end of day 3?
Well, I'll have to see what the Seahawks do in round 3 to fully answer that question. But I look at the Saints, what they've done so far, and it's not altogether impressive. I know a lot of people thought Marshawn Lattimore was the best cornerback in the draft. There are some injury concerns with him, so we'll see how good he truly is. Ryan Ramczyk, more injury concerns. Has only got 1 year college experience and has got loads of injuries and hasn't done any workouts going into the draft. Marcus Williams, safety, is a bit of a finesse player. Maybe able to make a few plays for them, but it's not really physical tone setting safety. And I think even if you're taking a safety with ball skills, you still want an element of physicality, and I don't really see that from Marcus Williams. And then they go and take a running back. So this is a team that's. The other thing the thing to factor in here is that, they've added Lattimore, Ramczyk, Williams, and Kamara. They've also got rid of Brandon Cooks, so he's gone to New England. And this is, you have to subtract him as well from the roster before you look at who they brought in. So I'm not particularly impressed with the way the Saints have managed their resources. Wasn't overly keen on what Tennessee did either with their 2 picks. And a quick note, Kenny, one of the positions that the Seahawks might have been sort of having a good look at is linebacker. The Saints that we've just been talking about have just taken Alex Anzalone. It's a player I really like from Florida. Another player with a lot of injury concerns. There seems to be a real theme there with New Orleans, but they've taken Anzalone there. So I think that's worth a flyer in this kind of range for them, round 3. And Duke Riley has gone to Atlanta. He's LSU linebacker, played with Deion Jones a year ago. I think it was back up to Deion Jones a year ago, and now gets to be reunited there in Atlanta. They've taken a linebacker as well. That is a position that the Seahawks mentioned in the start of the offseason that they wanted to add some bodies to and add some youth to. So we've seen a couple of linebackers go off the board here. If there was another one on the board that they really had to have, this could be the type of, double pick that might drive them to move up a little bit. But driving up to move up and get a backup linebacker is, again, it doesn't seem like the kind of move that they're going to make. I think still the most intriguing player who's left on the board for me is probably Jordan Lewis. I just think that, if Jeremy Lane's going to play outside corner, and Bradley McDougald might be your full-time big nickel, but if you want someone who's a bit more smaller, or a bit more of a cornerback, might for certain matchups, I think Jordan Lewis is a very interesting player. So he is somebody that I would give a great deal of thought to. They did meet with Shaq Griffin. That's worth highlighting. The UCF cornerback. They didn't meet with him during this process as well. So he's another player maybe to keep an eye on as the Panthers just make another pick, and Matt's just sort of see that it's Deshaun Hall. So we're seeing some of the players we talked about, Kenny, come off the board now. Deshaun Hall has gone to Carolina. We've had a very fascinating draft with Tristan McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, taking speed and playmaking and points on offense, and now getting Deshaun Hall, another pass rusher as well. So, if you were going to give teams a thumbs up, I think Carolina would be one of the teams who you have to say have had one of the better drafts so far.
There's a lot of talk, and there has been talk about the Seahawks taking a quarterback on day 2 with one of their 3rd round picks because they had 4 to spend, and because the situation at backup is not good. That the Seahawks they feel comfortable with Russell Wilson as a starter. He hasn't missed a game yet, but that there was definitely concerns last year. So with Trevone Boykin, not being he's a fine interesting player, but outside of his legal troubles, certainly I think there was enough there to be concerned that if you had to start Trevone Boykin, that could be in a situation where you're just chalking those games up to losses. That's how far of a drop it could technically be. And there was talk, well, we didn't get in not just a better backup, but maybe someone that they could groom for a future trade or whatever. And Davis Webb, Josh Dobbs are the top two quarterbacks left on the board for a lot of people. Do you think the Seahawks will take a quarterback, or like what odds, would you say the Seahawks of taking a quarterback today are, and how would you rank those two? And would you say that they're not even in your top two, with the next, tier being Nathan Peterman and Brad Kaya? How would you say the quarterbacks are ranking up for you right now as the Seahawks, next round of picks is coming closer?
Well, I can't say I've spent a great deal of time studying them because the Seahawks have got a quarterback. So, I didn't spend a lot of the time sort of studying the quarterback class, sort of, especially the ones like, Davis Webb, who were being touted to potentially go in round one at one point. There didn't seem much point having a look at him. I mean, as a coincidence, I've seen quite a lot of Joshua Dobbs. Just because Tennessee seemed to be on the TV every week last season. And, there was always something about Joshua Dobbs that you thought, yeah, do you know what? There's something to his game, and he's a really likable guy, clearly very intelligent, is a playmaker, was let down a few times by the receivers at Tennessee with sort of tip passes, and he'd get picked off and stuff like that. So there's something there. I think Chad Kelly was massively overrated at Ole Miss, and they'll probably take him with their next pick now. I've said that, but I just always thought, I never felt particularly enamored with him. He just seemed to, you would see a couple of, there was one really good throw against Florida State to Evan Engram, actually, which early touchdown, which was superb. But then you would see a play like that, and then you'd see 3 horrendous interceptions in the same game. So it was very hard to sort of work out what he is. He's had some really strange character off the field incidents. He stormed I think his brother was playing in a high school game when he stormed the field and started a riot almost as a consequence of this. Some really strange things were going on in the last year for Chad Kelly. So the other quarterbacks, not spent a great deal of time watching Nate Peterman. I think any quarterback they do bring in, Kenny, is going to have some ability. It's going to have to be somebody who can at least retain the kind of offensive style that we've seen with Russell Wilson. So that would tend to count out a Peterman and a Kaya and a Davis Webb, and would lean them more towards Chad Kelly, Joshua Dobbs, and that type of a player. So I think if they're going to take one, probably one of those two, Kelly or Dobbs. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard to watch at the moment because I know the player that Baltimore is going to take at 78. I'm not going to tip the pick in case people are listening to us and watching TV because they've not announced it yet on the NFL Network. But it's kind of tough. There are some very familiar names, players that you watch. This is always kind of the tougher side of the draft, is that you spend like 2 or 3 years watching these guys, and you sometimes wonder how they would fit in Seattle. You imagine them in Seattle. Sometimes if you really like a player, you kind of fantasize what they'd be like having them on the defense or the offense for Seattle. And then you see another team take them and you think, you were 12 picks away from having this guy. You've got 4 third-round picks. Could you have not moved up to secure a player like this? And yet, they're sticking with what they've got. So they clearly like the value from pick 90 to pick 111. They have not moved up. And I think at this point, it'd almost be a surprise if they did. So they're going to pick a lot of players. It does actually, Kenny, with the picks they've acquired, it makes me wonder if they're going to even take a kicker in this draft now. I know there's 1 or 2 decent kickers in this class. The guy from Arizona State, whose name I've forgotten, is Gonzalez, I think. Could be somebody that they look at now because they've got enough picks to kind of justify a selection like that. And it's going to be very interesting in what we are now, 78. So we're 12 picks away. I can say now this Ravens pick.
Well, I got
Williams.
Yeah. And I've even seen picks. I know the Jets took at 79 and the Colts picked at 8. So.
That's because Twitter's tipping the picks because they're well behind on the TV. I'm not gonna. I don't really. I kind of want to enjoy the purity of the draft. I remember watching the draft before Twitter began, and you didn't have any picks tipped or anything like this. I like to see the guy come on the stage, announce the pick, and sort of have that moment rather than just seeing Albert Breer or somebody like that blowing it for everybody. I mean, like, some people don't care and they just want to know the picks ASAP. For me, I just think there's something, you only get this once a year. And, if you can't enjoy sort of the moment of the guy coming out and announcing the pick, then I don't know. I think it takes away a large part of the value with it. But the Ravens getting Tim Williams, you look at their haul so far, they've got Tim Williams at the edge, Tyus Bowser at the edge, two pass rushers that can really have an impact for them. Chris Wormley work in the middle. He'll be stout and solid for them. And in the first round, they got Marlon Humphrey. When they've just taken, the Baltimore Ravens are fairly predictable what they do, but they have good drafts. And they've gone with 4 picks on the defense, 4 out of 4 so far. They are stocking up on defense. And you have to say, the players they've got, Kenny, pretty impressive so far.
Yeah, I think you look at the Baltimore Ravens, they have a high upside for next season. If they look at the fact that they added Danny Woodhead, will they get better at, some of those skill positions? Well, Brashad Perryman, their first round pick from a couple years ago, he played in all of the games last year, but, still wasn't that effective. 50% of his catches, 499 yards. And so they're retooling, but they could come back. And because John Harbaugh is, in my opinion, one of the top 5 coaches in the NFL, I think Ozzie Newsome, is probably one of the top 5 GMs in the NFL. The Baltimore Ravens could definitely be back next year, and that the picks look really good. Just to update what you had said earlier about the kickers in the draft and about the kicker from Arizona State, Zane Gonzalez, 6'1", 190 pounds, projected to be the first kicker off the board. Gonzalez was this is from WalterFootball.com. Gonzalez was extremely accurate in 2016, connecting on 23 of 25 field goals attempts. He was also 6 of 9 from 50-plus, and including a 59-yard field goal. He wasn't as accurate as a junior, but he had good seasons as a sophomore and freshman, and he kicked well at the Senior Bowl. The Seahawks have Blair Walsh right now, who doesn't give you a lot of feeling of security. But certainly, are they in the market for a kicker? Could they be the team that takes a kicker? I don't know. It's uncharted territory for the Seahawks to show their hands whether or not that they would draft a kicker at a time when they feel they really need one. They didn't feel too bad going the free agent route with Stephen Hauschka, back in the day. And, because I think the thing with kickers is they are so often reclamation projects that turn out really well. They are so often guys that got cut 5 or 6 times before they finally figured it out, and then they lose it again. See that in Stephen Hauschka. Will we see that now in Blair Walsh? The Adam Vinatieri's out there are Hall of Famers for a reason. It's very rare that you find a guy that's just consistently good every single year. So if that's something that they see in Zane Gonzalez, but at the same time, if you look back at last year, and it just seems anytime someone takes a kicker high, Nick Folk, it doesn't turn out that well. But obviously Sebastian Janikowski is another guy who's been very solid for a long time, albeit not great. He wouldn't put him up there with the Hall of Famers by any means, but certainly a good pick. Not a good pick because it was a first rounder, but a good kicker. And maybe it did turn out well. And the Seahawks, there's only about at this point 7 or 8 picks to go before the Seahawks are on the clock again. And, no word yet that they would be trading up from 90. I don't know necessarily what they're going to do with all these picks, 90, 95, 102, 106, and then 111 in the 4th round. So they've got, once you get to 90, the Seahawks have 5 of the next 21 picks. So they would be quite rich in that area. And Rob, do you feel if the Seahawks really felt a certain way about a guy, wouldn't they, trade up and say, like, why do we need all of these picks? Obviously, at this point, you can't even really trade up with the picks that they've got in the 4th round. They're not going to trade 2 third-round picks to move up 8 spots, right? So at this point, they almost have to take all of those guys unless they're going to trade for next year's value. What positions are you looking to fill with these next 4 picks?
Well, clearly, as we've been saying, they like the value here, and look, it's okay to be wrong, and my impression was that there was going to be a drop off in talent around sort of the next sort of 10 or so picks. So, around about the range when the Seahawks were going to be sort of picking their comp picks, there would be a drop off in talent. they clearly see it very differently. They clearly sort of see some kind of value here in terms of the positions that they're going to look at. They might take a quarterback to provide some competition and depth. I think that's, they would have to really believe in one of the players to do that, because that is a player essentially you never want to see the field. And it would say perhaps more about Trevon Boykin than anything else. But I think the other positions are, can you get a good receiver? Can you get a Chris Godwin or somebody like that? Can you get do you want to take a chance on a J.O. Chesson being more in the NFL than he was in Michigan's offense, which was very much a run-heavy system? Do you take a chance on a George Kittle at tight end, or a Bucky Hodges is still on the board? I'd be thinking he'd be somebody quite interesting, because of his skill set. You see tight ends, very athletic tight ends, going into the second, third, fourth round, who end up having pretty good careers. So, he's somebody that maybe you think about taking. George Kittle, that's an area that you would look at. A lot of the good edge rushers are coming off the board. So that might be, if you wanted to add a bit of depth there, that might be a position you'll find it quite difficult to do now. I'm just looking through the list. I think Carlos Watkins is somebody that maybe if they wanted to add another defensive tackle, he's somebody that they could look at. For sure. Derek Rivers is still there, very explosive edge rusher. Interestingly, Washington have just taken Fabian Moreau, so he's no longer on the board there. Moreau going to the Washington team. He's got a torn pectoral muscle. He would have gone a lot earlier than this without that. And then, aside from those positions, I guess you want to look at linebacker depth. I'm looking at the linebacker list now, Kenny. Do you take a chance on someone like Kendall Beckwith getting healthy? Anthony Walker could be someone they look at. His short shuttle was good enough. Elijah Lee could be somebody that they have a bit of interest in. Dylan Cole had a fantastic pro day. And then the safeties that we mentioned, Shalom Luani, really like him. John Johnson, somebody they might look at Boston College. Tedrick Thompson had a good career. Rayshon Jenkins, like him. Eddie Jackson, people do like Eddie Jackson. Shalom Luani. At cornerback, it's going to be very interesting to see what they do, because you have to believe they're going to take a corner at some point. They've never taken a cornerback earlier than the fourth round, and I think taking him in the late third, it's kind of an extension of that. Yeah, all right, it's a little bit earlier than in the past. So you look at the cornerbacks that are left on the board. Rasul Douglas, who, if you were just to talk about his tape and how he looks on that, then you would say he's a very good player. He's not got the great wingspan. He's not got a great athletic profile. He ran a 4.6. Darryl Worley from West Virginia as well last year went in the late third round. For that reason, I kind of thought, well, he tested very well, very similarly to Rasul Douglas. So, is that going to repeat itself? So Douglas may well go in the late third as well. Cordrea Tankersley is such a good. I think he's such a sparky little player, and I think in the sort of third round range, taking a chance on him would be worthwhile for sure. I've always liked Cam Sutton. They may well think that they could turn him into a safety or maybe use him in the slot. And then there's Jordan Lewis, who's still there as well. And I think if nothing would make me happier, I think, Kenny, and I say this because if the Seahawks had taken them, then it kind of validates the assertion that nothing would excite me more if they could, get a Jordan Lewis, get a Tankersley here, or a Rasul Douglas or somebody like that in round 3. And provide a bit of cornerback depth here.
This is not again. It would be not a need, but I'm a really big fan of Kareem Hunt, the running back at Toledo. His numbers, not just his numbers, but just the way he played football. I mean, I know that it's for Toledo, but just seems like a really intriguing player. And in terms of things that aren't needs necessarily, like running back. Any thoughts on maybe the running backs that are left, or Kareem Hunt, or anything that wouldn't be a necessary need, but just a best player available situation?
I'm not a big fan of his. I never was. I think that he's got a laboured second gear. I think when there was some physicality that you like, but when you get into the spread system they use, it was a lot of very open running lanes, and he wouldn't really make the most of those. So I'm not a huge fan of his. I think that there are other running backs that I would take first. P. Ryan at Oklahoma, or Even a Foreman at Texas at this range could provide a bit of value there. So I think there'd be running backs I would take before him. I'm not sure. I think that if you were going to take a running back, I would have seriously had a good look at Dalvin Cook in round 2. I'm not sure that you do that here.
And there was the Patriots. I know their pick. Let me know when you see the Patriots pick, because obviously the Patriots, they didn't have a first round pick because they traded for Brandon Cooks. They didn't have a second round pick because they traded down with the Carolina Panthers in order to add Coney Ealy, and then they traded down again with the Tennessee Titans, and they're on the clock and they made a pick. But there's been a lot of talk this offseason about the Patriots having the best team, obviously, because they won the Super Bowl, and then just seemingly having the best free agency. And now they've been able to add Brandon Cooks to their team. They've been able to, make some really good moves in free agency, despite the fact that you would think they don't have a lot of cap space, but they do. And now, even with the draft seemingly, maybe coming away with a good player here, Rob, how do you feel about or explain that the Patriots continually just seem to do the thing that makes everyone else just jealous and hate them all the time?
Just because they win a lot of games, and a lot of their drafts in the past have been pretty similar to ones like this for Seattle, where they've traded down, and their fans have been like, oh, why don't we just take a player? And you've traded down before, you've taken this, Rasai Dowling or whatever it was a few years ago in Virginia, and he never amounted to anything. And there's been a lot of that in New England, and people often forget that. They had some very barren drafts. And then it was almost like the Gronkowski picks just sort of kickstarted things again. And they've had a bit of success. Dante Tower's been a good pick for them. They've had one or two other players that have worked out, but they do have some generally frustrating drafts. And that's because their way of doing things is very similar to Seattle. They have a Patriots type of player. They have a player who they want to bring into their culture. The Ravens have this as well, and the Seahawks have this, and all of these great teams that have these cultures do not hit on every pick. In terms of what the Patriots have done recently over the last few years, I think it's kind of hit and miss. Not picking in the first 2 rounds in this draft, I think is a little bit bizarre. I'm not a huge Coney Ealy fan. They swapped out of the second round in order to get him. I believe that their next pick coming up is Derek Rivers.
You think pick 32 for Brandon Cooks was better than anything they could have gotten at pick 32?
Maybe because Cooks is a proven commodity, and they've got Tom Brady, and he's going to feed him the ball. And we've seen what he's done with players like that in the past. So potentially so. But it's like when the Seahawks traded for Jimmy Graham, the entire league was jealous about that. When the Seahawks traded for Percy Harvin, everybody was jealous about it. Sometimes these moves that everybody's like, oh, that's amazing. Why do we never do anything like that? They don't work out. And the great thing, the Patriots could do whatever they want in the draft or the offseason in general. As long as they've got Belichick and Brady and the rest of the AFC East is an absolute clown show, they're going to have a really good chance of getting into the Super Bowl every year. It's the one thing, if the Seahawks in this run, we talk about dynasties and stuff like that. In this run that the Seahawks have been on since 2012, pretty much 2011, 2012, if they hadn't have had, really competitive divisional rivals, they would have had a much easier route through to multiple Super Bowls and potentially winning championships. That it cannot be underestimated how much easier it is for teams if they don't have to go to war, 6 times a season against teams that just want to smash you as much as you want to smash them. And when you've had, the Seahawks went from Harbaugh and the Niners and these great battles they had to suddenly the Arizona Cardinals becoming really competitive again. And then the Rams under Fisher were kind of inept for the most part, but would always give the Seahawks a really good game. And when you've got a division like that, it's quite hard it's a real endurance battle to get through regular season and the playoffs. And it's also harder to win sort of 12, 13, 14 games. Whereas the Patriots kind of get 4 to 6 wins every year from their own division, makes life a little bit easier, makes your decisions in the offseason look a little brighter as well as a consequence. Winning will make everything seem better. And if you win lots of games, everything you do in the postseason is going to be praised. And yeah, when I look at what the Browns have done in this draft, I really like what the Browns have done. how many people are queuing up to bestow them with loads of praise because it's Cleveland? People are suspicious of Cleveland. Yet when you look at what they've done in this draft, I think they've had a really, really smart draft so far.
I see on my TV that the Patriots pick is in. The Denver Broncos just selected Carlos Henderson, wide receiver. So they were a team that, obviously has Demaryius Thomas and has Emmanuel Sanders and, recently spent a second-round pick on Cody Latimer, though, you have to take it as it is. And, they've been looking for more weapons to maybe build around Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch rather than try to replace them to build up the offensive line, which is what they did by selecting Garrett Bowles in the first round. But in perfect fashion of this draft, seeing John Ledyard, a draft guy that, I like on Twitter, saying Carlos Henderson is a great pick, and I liked him more than John Ross. So it seems like, this is another thing where it's just such a divisive group, at many positions, but also at wide receiver. Thoughts on Carlos Henderson and where he fits into the Broncos' plans? Because, obviously the starting two wide receivers, not a big need, but definitely some sort of future there and just additional weapons. So thoughts on that pick?
Yeah, not overly crazy about it. The receiver that has just gone, Chris Godwin, to Tampa Bay, I kind of prefer him. I think he's a little bit more rounded. I think he's got the kind of potential to come in and be kind of an understated type of player that Allen Robinson was when he left Penn State to go to Jacksonville. He's kind of got that potential. And in this offense, in this Tampa Bay offense, I think Chris Godwin could be a really useful player, because he's going to be like the number 3 behind Deshaun Jackson and Mike Evans. They've got O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, the 2 tight ends, and now you throw Chris Godwin into the mix as well. I think that's a really nice pick for Tampa Bay. The issue with Carlos Henderson is there is some character issues there. I think that his personality is perhaps not for everybody, and I think that for that reason, it's a bit of a gamble. He does have some talent, though. I mean, he's one of those players like Godwin, I guess, who you look at him and you can think, yeah, there's something there you could work with. But I can't say that I'm particularly jealous of seeing Denver make that pick either.
And obviously now we can say that the Patriots took Derek Rivers, the defensive end out of Youngstown State, that I think was, building more hype as the draft year went on. And so a lot of people really liked him from an athletic standpoint. Obviously, Youngstown State doesn't stand out from a program standpoint, but, a lot of people saying, oh, the Patriots, there they go again, getting a first-round talent. We talked about them a little bit, but do you believe that Derek Rivers is a first-round talent or someone that can make Bill Belichick look genius again?
A first-round talent? No. He to me is a bit of a draft Twitter creation to an extent. Somebody that kind of becomes quite fashionable to praise and to knock a bigger name. And I think that when you sort of look at him, there are things to like. I mean, he tested quite explosive supposedly in the combine. He's got some of the sort of the measurables and the traits that you would look for in a decent edge rusher. Doesn't have the arm length. It's like 32-inch arms, 32.5-inch arms. So I don't look at that pick and think I wish he was in Seattle right now. I mean, I'm keep looking at the names and I keep sort of anticipating that one of these cornerbacks that I've got my eye on are going to come off the board any second now. Jordan Lewis is someone the Seahawks have met with, and I'm kind of like looking at him and thinking it'd be great to get him at this point. Great to get him, use him as a slot receiver, and feel pretty good about that. And then you can let Jeremy Lane compete outside. You've got some guys that you like who can compete outside. But then you've got someone who can work inside and kind of rotate a little bit with Bradley McDougall. Cordrea Tankersley is a player that I, again, really, really like him. Could imagine them sort of looking at him and maybe thinking he could be an outside guy they could work on. They've had success with Clemson cornerbacks in the past. Byron Maxwell being a good example of that. And Rasul Douglas too. So, these are three cornerbacks, kind of the bigger names that are left on the board at the moment, and kind of sitting there with Seattle with 4 picks in this round. And you would have to hope that you'd have to anticipate rather than hope that one of those picks is going to be spent on a defensive back at some point. So, let me think now. So we're on pick 85 on the TV. Because there's such a backlog, they may well be on the clock by now, the Seahawks. But I would appreciate, Kenny, if nobody would tip the pick to us either on social media or if we certainly won't mention it on this. If people want to watch it,
all I know at this point is that in reality, not what's on TV, but in reality, only 2 picks remain between. Only 2 more players will go before the Seahawks are on the clock at 90, and then at that point, all of the picks belong to Seattle. I know who I know who the Chiefs picked. I think it's fair to say that the Chiefs and the Vikings made a trade. And then I know who the Giants picked. And then it's the Raiders, Texans, and then it's the Seahawks. Once the Seahawks make their pick at 90, they're scheduled to pick 5 picks later at 95, and then 7 picks after that at 102, and then 4 picks after that at 106. So in a couple minutes here, we're going to be able to talk a lot about what the Seahawks are doing. It's going to be all Seahawks all the time. That's the new NFL model. I've been pitching it to Roger Goodell. I've been saying, why not just all Seahawks all the time? He is saying nothing. So far, none of the emails have gone through. The phone calls haven't been returned. I've been texting him, but it turns out that number was, just given to me in a dream while I was smoking peyote. So overall, not getting a lot of messages through to Roger Goodell, but if I could, I would say, let's speed this thing up and get to all of the Seahawks picks, because that's what I'm waiting for. And he, again, not responding. So just a couple more picks left for the Seahawks. When I look at the board, I'm just looking at it. I like the idea there of Jordan Lewis. I mean, it's just such an interesting situation to be in, because now I'm suddenly sitting here and I'm like, 4 picks. Don't think all of them can make the roster. Maybe do take a kicker. Maybe do take the kicker and just say, we like this kicker and we don't really care. We're going to put him into a competition and we hope he wins the job. So, but overall, I mean, also looking at Nico Siragusa, who I wrote an article about, San Diego State guard, and just feeling like, he just checks a lot of the boxes for the Seahawks. I know they've taken Ethan Pocic, but, it's not like I just can't even understand the idea of because people are going to complain if the Seahawks don't draft an offensive lineman, and then they're going to complain about the offensive lineman that they do draft, or they're going to even go as far to say well, you're just going to waste an offensive lineman. So it's a lose-lose situation as it comes to the offensive line. It's one way to overlook the fact that the Seahawks are a highly successful organization. Then it's totally fine also to question the picks. But I would also just ask for, for the people out there that do question the picks to just have a little bit more, overall just thinking about them in terms of what it is, which is we don't know yet anything about Ethan Pocic, and we don't know yet about the guys that they may or may not draft in the next 15 picks. It'll all unfold as it were, and if we've lost confidence in them, the Seahawks, to develop them, even then I would say, look, the worst case scenario is that maybe the reality is just that the Seahawks don't know how to develop tackles, because they've done a decent job of drafting guards. To have guys that play guard. J.R. Sweezy, 7th round pick, should not have been a starting guard in the NFL, and yet he was. Justin Britt didn't work out at tackle, but he's worked out at center. James Carpenter didn't work out at tackle, but he worked out at guard. So maybe the problem is that they just don't know how to develop tackles. We'll find out maybe this year with Jermaine Ifedi. But that's the thing. So if they're going to take a Pocic, I don't know if it necessarily precludes them from Isaac Asiata or Nico Siragusa, both of whom who fit the athletic profile. But at least in the very least, we are very close to the Seahawks having a bunch of picks. So I think about it in that way. So overall, I think the Seahawks, you just got to take the success, and hopefully, there's less Tom Cable memes this year, although I can't imagine that there will be. Just a couple more picks for the Seahawks. I'm sure even those tipped at this point.
Well, I don't know. I've clicked off Twitter for now because I want to enjoy listening to the Seahawks pick and then sort of giving some reaction to the people immediately after it's been called, as opposed to what's popping up on Twitter, because there may be a lot of people listening to us who don't want it tipped. I think the thing with the Seahawks pick thing is I've watched a lot of these players. I've watched a lot of college football during the season. I've since spent the last few months, really studying this class. really looking at different players, writing some quite long articles about a lot of these players. And I don't personally feel in a position to criticize these picks. And look, with Ethan Pocic, I've been quite clear. I don't know enough about him to say it's a good or a bad pick. I need to go and watch him, and I will write a post about this in the next few days, about thoughts on him, thoughts whether it's a good pick, a bad pick, or whatever. There are people out there who are asserting whether this is a good or a bad class based on positions, essentially, or by what other people are telling them, or by things they're reading on the internet, or their perception of, well, I wanted them to draft Kevin King, so they haven't, therefore Malik McDowell is a bad pick. I didn't want them to take Pocic. I wanted them to take this guy, therefore I'm not happy about this. And it's weird. It's almost a bit like complaining about a Seahawks game performance during the regular season, having not watched the game and only seen that they lost 23-20. How do you know whether these are good or bad picks? How do you know? Do you know the ins and outs of these players? Are you just relying on, geeks like me who've watched a lot of these things telling you what to think? I sit down, watch the players, form opinions based on what you are seeing on YouTube and stuff like that. It's very easy on YouTube. If you can, Brett Coleman's done a really nice breakdown of Malik McDowell. I've put the YouTube video on the blog. If you want to go and see that, it's there. I would recommend watching that. There's about 5 or 6 Malik McDowell games on YouTube as well. There'll be countless examples of Pocic playing on Draft Breakdown or on YouTube. Go and watch them. Spend, after the draft, a bit of time looking at these guys and read upon them, and then form your opinions, because you might actually discover that you might actually find out that you like them a lot more than you thought. And like I say, Malik McDowell could have been a top 10 pick. Seahawks get him at 35. And if he ends up being what he's capable of being, then him next to Bennett and Averill and Clark and the rest, and Jaron Reed and others, and Ruben is quite a frightening proposition. It's very, very intriguing. And look, Seahawks fans were complaining a lot about the O-line last year. They've taken another offensive lineman with a second round pick, so they've addressed that as well. And now they're well set with just a couple of picks to go to address depth on defense and in the secondary.
What pick are you at right now?
Raiders at 88.
Okay, so we've got the Patriots take Antonio Garcia, the Chiefs trade up and take Kareem Hunt, who we talked about, and the Giants took Webb, who we talked about. Antonio Garcia was pretty close on that TEF score. What were your thoughts on him?
Sorry, say that again. Which play?
Antonio Garcia. He was pretty close on the TEF score. What were your thoughts?
My thoughts on him was that his pass protect. I saw the game against Clemson that he had, which was really, really good. I mean, the game that his pass protection against Clemson, one of the better teams, was tremendous. But his run blocking left a lot to be desired. And ultimately, you kind of think that's probably the difference there for the Seahawks not considering him and considering him, is that they want their offensive linemen to be able to run block really well, and that was a work in progress. The other thing, there was kind of talk of him struggling to retain weight, and he was kind of like in the 280s, 290s. I think at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine, and he didn't gain weight from Senior Bowl to the Combine, which suggests that he is struggling to put on weight. For some people, it's very difficult to add weight. Maybe when he gets in a pro diet plan, he can get there. Something has a lot of potential, but somebody that as soon as I watched a bit more on the run blocking and heard about the weight situation, I never kind of had a feeling that he was going to be a Seahawk down the line. So. I not necessarily one we missed out on there.
Well, officially the Seahawks are on the clock. I don't know who went 88 and 89th, but I do know that the Seahawks are on the clock. They own 4 of the next 16 picks. That's basically 25% of the picks through the end of the day. So expect a lot of Seahawks up here on the clock. We're just waiting to find out who's off the board, and then obviously who the Seahawks will take.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I said the backlog that the NFL is creating here with this, I get they want to make it entertaining, and it's nice to have the ex-players doing the picks in round 2, and now they have current players, I think, doing it in round 3. and but like really, who cares who's calling the picks? You know, like they bring the guy out, he gets a round of applause. Some of them spend about 30 seconds delaying things. There was, one guy was on earlier saying Happy Mother's Day to his mother, who's 103 this week. The guy for the Raiders, and like you just think, just get on with it. Let's hear the pick. And then the other problem is that there'll be like 3 or 4 picks backed up. They will announce one pick, and rather than just saying like, let's crack on here, let's get on with the next pick because it's in and ready. They don't. They then have another advert break, and then they come back and do a bit of talking, and then the TV companies decide they're going to name it. And by this time, there's several reporters on Twitter that are getting texts from people in, one of the scout buddies they have, or an agent who they know is sending them the picks, and it does kind of spoil it as a spectacle. And look, I think the Seahawks I can see that the Seahawks, I think, have picked at this point.
Yeah, they have. It's been announced on Twitter. I'm not saying anything here.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to wait because they've still not announced the Raiders pick on the TV. So they've still got to announce the Raiders and the Texans. So it might be a little bit frustrating for some people that if they already know on Twitter that they're going to have to wait till it's announced. But I hate the way that they kind of spoil it. And I also don't really see the need for people to tip these things. I know it's almost apologies for the vulgar use of language. It's like a dick measuring competition. It's like, well, look, I can text my buddy who's in the Eagles scouting department and the lowest strand, and they're getting the picks from the NFL as they actually happen live. So Oakland took Eddie Vanderdoes. That's interesting. Surprisingly explosive Eddie Vanderdoes from UCLA goes to the Raiders. So Houston are going to make their pick now, and then Seattle's will finally be announced. Yeah, I just think. I also think if the NFL really wants to nail this, the best thing they could do is just have like almost a direct line. So like have somebody on the phone with the team who stood next to the commissioner, gets the pick, hands him the card, he goes out there, then the teams get told. And it's all happening almost in real time. The problem they've got is it's not real time. They have the pick gets made. There's about 3 or 4 minutes goes by. Then the commissioner comes out in the first round anyway. He makes the pick. He goes back inside. They do it all over again. And then the second and third round, they've got to keep introducing these guests. And then it gets even worse tomorrow because then they don't even show the picks being called. They'll just have they'll interview Jabril Peppers at some point, and then they'll interview somebody else. And then Mayock will probably start singing again, or he'll lose his voice, and then they'll do something else, and then they'll go and speak to Steve Smith again, and then you're not actually even watching the picks. It's kind of like a side issue, and they don't realize that the only Sadaks like me are the ones watching the draft on the third day. So here's the Texans pick. They're finally announcing the Texans pick, and then the Seahawks pick will be finally announced. And then by the time they've announced this pick, Kenny, you will probably know what the pick is at 95 because they're on the clock again shortly afterwards. So
right, it's going that way.
So Brian Cushing is just doing the Houston pick right now. So see who they're going to take. So they've taken Dante Foreman. So it's interesting for them because they've got they spent all that money on Lamar Miller. Foreman, a Texas guy. Played at Texas, is going to stay in Texas with Houston. It's a very emotional moment for him. They're showing him on the TV. There's a guy behind him wearing a hat and shades inside, and he's carrying a plate of food. So it's quite the amusing shot that they've got him in his front room. So hopefully they're not going to go to an advert break here to delay things even more. They seem to love the advert breaks. So we'll see if they just call the Seahawks pick or whether we can actually talk about a pick, or whether they're going to go to some adverts here. So Deontay Foreman's still on the shot at the moment. I mean, he's a guy who you just wish he was a little bit more physical. Deontay Foreman, you kind of you watch him and you want to really like him when he gets into space and he kind of shifts through the gears and he's really fast for a bigger back. You think, yeah, there's something about him that's really cool, and then you see a couple of other shots where he goes down quite easily under contact. Can be a little bit frustrating. I've got this awful sense that they're building up to an advert break here on the NFL Network, which is just going to drag things out even more. And we're kind of in this awkward situation here where you know the pick and I don't, and I'm kind of filling.
Well, if you want to just mute up real quick, because I'm getting an echo, and I'll talk a bit. So just to recap, the Seahawks pick 90th overall. They are on the clock, both on TV, but not in real life. I don't know. I think that they are on the clock over there at the studio, but the picks are going from before they've been announced on TV, they're being leaked out to whoever in the media that's able to get it out. And I mean, they haven't even put up the Seahawks on the graphic for NFL Network, despite the fact that I think in real life we're more like at pick 94 right now, with the Seahawks coming close to their next pick at 95. The Texans selecting Donta Foreman out of Texas. But overall, the Seahawks pick has been talked about on Twitter for the last 7 or 8 minutes. And it does make for this awkward pause. And I don't know what the NFL is thinking, honestly, or what they're doing to either not shore up those leaks or get the picks out faster. I personally, and I was thinking about this even before you said anything, Rob, and I was thinking about this before we ever got to the point of talking about them announcing the picks. But I mean, I was looking at the people coming out for the second and the third round, and sometimes it's like a nice story of like, hey, this is a Make-A-Wish, or this is, a legend that, maybe overcame a tough, battle with something or whatever. I won't say save those, do those in the first round, because I don't give a shit if it's Roger Goodell. And I'm just sitting there and I'm imagining all these people like whatever, Tony Baselli or Clinton Portis, just thinking of some of the names that I saw come out earlier. And I'm like, the NFL probably flew this person out there so they could get up and say 7 words. And it didn't even matter who said the words. I don't care who says the words. It's this, not only just because it's the second and third round, I don't care. All the announcements and stuff are fun and they can be fun, but maybe have more fun with it. Just let the fans announce it or something like that, because I really don't care.
Well, you see, the thing is the thing that frustrates me about it is it's almost like they're trying to appeal to a broader audience, that they think that, well, we'll be interested in the picks, but the non-NFL draft fans will be interested in like 15 seconds of Tony Baselli. And that doesn't make any sense. You just like, this is a thing, for draft geeks all over the world, and like proper NFL fans want to know who their teams are getting in round 3, at the end of round 3, no less. Let's just see the picks, get them out as real time as possible, and let's get on with it. I mean, to have the advert breaks the number of advert breaks they're having. You mentioned that for 10 minutes now, the Seahawks pick has been talked about on Twitter, and they just like, did they not realize that this is hurting the viewers? If I wasn't doing this podcast with you, Kenny, if I wasn't doing the blog, I think I'd have probably just given up on the NFL Network at this point and would just be on Twitter joining in with everybody else, because why not?
I mean, they are literally, it's literally, as we were joking earlier, they're literally one pick away from the Seahawks' next pick.
Yeah, they didn't, can I just say, they didn't even show the Seahawks pick on the NFL Network. They went to an advert break. They came back. They then started to do an interview with Donta Foreman, and they've announced that LA's last pick was the John Johnson from Boston College. So, Kenny, what I'm going to ask you to do is to make up for the uselessness of the NFL Network in not giving us even the moment that we've been waiting for to just hear the pick. That actually the pick came out while they were doing the adverts. I want you to do in your best Roger Goodell impression. I want you to announce the pick for me.
Oh man, this is great.
Live on the podcast.
Okay. So if you're Rob Staton, or if you're someone who has been watching the TV and haven't been paying any attention, this is for you. With the 90th pick in the 2017 NFL Draft, the Seattle Seahawks select Shaquille Griffin, cornerback, UCF.
There we go. So, Shaq Griffin then. We mentioned him a little while ago, didn't we? And that they'd had a visit with Shaq Griffin. He was one of the VMAT visitors. This is Malik McDowell was a VMAT visitor, and so was Shaq Griffin. So two players they visited with. There is a lot of ugly plays on tape. I mean, there are plays where he gets beat. There are plays where you think, that was a bit frustrating there, and wish he hadn't have done that. But then there are some good things as well. And the other thing to consider is that he had a really nice combine. He ran a 4.38. 4.38 in the 40-yard dash, which was incredibly fast. He's got decent size, 195 pounds. He's got the 32.5-inch arms. Ticks the arm length test. Had a really nice vertical and broad jump. His short shuttle, we've kind of spent a lot more time on that this year. In particular for cornerbacks, he's pretty good. I just wonder, because of the short shuttle time, Kenny, whether or not they'll try him in the slot, whether he is going to be an outside cornerback, whether he's going to be somebody that they try and develop into a slot cornerback. He's relatively physical, decent size and strength. He was projected to go in this kind of range. I think Tony Pauline mentioned him as someone who had moved up into the third round after the combine. So, not an altogether surprising pick, but an interesting one. And they do take a cornerback now. So that will no doubt appease a lot of people. It's not Jordan Lewis. It's not Cordrea Tankersley. But they've taken a very, very fast, reasonably stout cornerback. And I'm just really, really interested to see if they're going to use him as an outside guy or as an inside guy.
Through the Twitter and online, the Seahawks 95th pick has also been announced. So hopefully the NFL Network isn't, and so slow, but they're still talking to John Johnson, I think, and they're still haven't announced the Cowboys pick at 92, which is fairly old at this point. But we'll get to the Seahawks pick at 95 when it's time to get to them. Rob, just sticking with Shaq Griffin. And you've said a lot so far. You said everything that's to be said. One thing that I haven't heard too much about or talked about a lot is hand size. But it comes up now and then. We talk about the wingspan and the arm length of the cornerbacks, but I see Shaq Griffin's hands at 8 3/4 inches, which I don't usually see them below 9 inches. Is hand length anything for cornerbacks? At one point, does hand size come into play?
Not really, because the thing with the receiver is that if you've got a big mitts, it's easier to catch a football, and that's what you're on the field to do, to catch a football. With a cornerback, it's often about disrupting plays, getting a hand in there, deflecting a football, breaking a play up, recovery speed. So almost just being in the way, essentially. And it can be helpful to help you make interceptions, I guess. But more often than not, the way the game speed is, you're not sort of catching the ball as a cornerback because you've got big hands. It's because you're in the right place at the right time. It's because you've controlled the route. It's because ball's been deflected maybe, or because you've just undercut the route. So I don't think that hand size is a major issue. It's interesting that Seattle took Shaq Griffin at 90. Jordan Lewis came off the board at 92 to Dallas. So, Dallas having a decent draft so far. And I really like Jordan Lewis. I thought he was a really gritty little player. Seahawks have gone with more of an athlete. It'd be very interesting, as I said, to see whether or not they view him as someone who can compete outside over time, or whether they see him as kind of like a slightly bigger slot type player. His run support is good, so that might suggest that he's going to be more of an outside player, that they feel comfortable playing him outside because his run support is good. And we know how important that is for the Seahawks, and that's probably one of the reasons why, Keller Witherspoon was an overrated option, amongst people talking about that for Seattle, and why someone like Shaq Griffin has ultimately been the pick.
How big of a factor do you think Bradley McDougald will play next season for the Seahawks?
Well, they seem to be implying that he's essentially a starter. That he's not just a backup safety, that he's a big nickel, that he is, somebody that can play quite an important role, that they really liked what he did. He had a really good game against Seattle last season. And we've often talked about how they did run a scheme with 5 defensive backs on the field a lot last year. And if they're going to do that again, then playing 3 safeties. I mean, Pete Carroll's talked about playing 3 safeties on the field and using kind of that big nickel role. I think it might be a role that some weeks it'll work and some it won't. So having some flexibility there is going to be important, and that might be why, if they see Shaq Griffin as someone who can play inside, that might be something they do. But I think Bradley McDougall's going to have a chance to earn a longer stay in Seattle. And sort of reading into a bit about him and looking into him a little bit more recently, he certainly seems like he has the kind of personality that fits this team.
The Packers pick is in, and then we're just 2 picks away from them announcing the Seahawks pick, which is already well known by now. But just a couple more to go, and then after the Seahawks pick at 95, it'll be 7 more picks from that. But even then, I know who the Dolphins picked at 97. So the coverage is so far behind right now. It's a little disheartening, and hopefully they learned from this, because I've never remembered it being quite this bad in the past, as far as the leaks and the delays and waiting for people to get up there. Because from now on, for now, we're just sort of delaying and trying to, spend time. The Packers select, and now they can announce it, the defensive tackle Montravius Adams out of Auburn. Was there anything special there? Because obviously the Packers, though they aren't in the NFC West, maybe they are the Seahawks' biggest rival right now.
Sorry, say that again, Kenny.
Any thoughts there on Montravius Adams?
I know that there's a lot of people in the blog community that really like him. I always thought he was a bit meh, a bit sort of fairly average. The kind of guy that you wouldn't be a surprise at all that if he came into the NFL and actually ended up being quite a solid contributor. Not somebody that you would ever imagine being, a major stud at the next level, but somebody who maybe garners a lot of praise and is well respected for the job that he does. But you also wouldn't be surprised if he just ended up being a fairly modest rotational piece on the defensive line. And one thing that the Packers haven't really done since BJ Raji is be able to plug really good interior defensive linemen into their system. So I'm not overly concerned with the Packers. I mean, the Packers seem to have some magic spell that whenever they play the Seahawks, they seem to play pretty well, even when they lose. They don't seem to have that against a lot of other teams. It'd be nice if the Seahawks could start the season very strongly. That's going to be quite an interesting game, by the way, that first week of the season, because you've got Seattle going up against Kevin King at cornerback, and you've got Eddie Lacy running against Green Bay in his Seattle debut. So that could be an interesting one. I hate to say it, Kenny, but they've gone to another set of adverts on the NFL Network. So I've got this vision of, by the time they actually return from the adverts, that you may be announcing the next pick anyway. So I'm thinking maybe you just do it and we just press on here with discussing it. I don't know. I mean, what do you want to do that? Do you think people are going to be mad if you announce the pick Roger Goodell style again? I thought you did a pretty good job the last time.
Oh, thanks. I don't know if people will be mad. I haven't gone into the comments a ton here to see what people are saying on field goals, just because there are so many comments. People love they love the draft, but also the Seahawks are, they're the stars right now because they're picking all the time. I can definitely do it. We're just talking about now the Steelers. It's been announced here on my TV that they've picked Cameron Sutton. So the Steelers have picked Cam Sutton, the guy that you've talked about quite a bit in one of your favorites in terms of maybe on a player standpoint, but maybe didn't. And then the interesting thing too about all of these players and cornerbacks that the Seahawks haven't picked is just the fact that
Kenny pick them. Kenny, can I just start you? They missed the Seahawks pick again on the NFL Network. So they've just announced, they've just shown it up on the screen now. So it was Delano Hill,
Yeah.
the Michigan safety. So if you want a quick thought on him, of all the Michigan players, he tested very well. But of all the Michigan players actually to watch on that defense, he was the one who, I think it's fair to say, stood out the least. So we've seen sort of Jabril Peppers, Chris Wormley, Jordan Lewis go off the board, Taco Charlton, and Hill's got the kind of profile, the numbers, but doesn't quite have. At least, you know, because I'm not completely focused on him, but he never truly stood out. I'm just going to try and get his workout numbers up on the screen here, but you know, they were always likely to take a safety at some point. I kind of really liked what Rayshawn Jenkins brought. Thought he had a real physical side to him, and you know, I think there's still a chance that Shalom Luani down the line could be someone they look at. But they were they praised quite a lot this Michigan defense, and I've actually just looked on the draft tracker here because it gives you a grade for the player, and you know, he received quite a poor grade from Lance Zierlein, who had a number of safeties who were rated higher than him still on the board. But you know, the Seahawks did like that Michigan defense. He did run a 4.47. He's got 32-inch arms. He's got good size. So Zierlein was projecting him to go in round 5 or 6. He's got him round 3 here. They obviously like what he's about. I mean, again, I'm not a player that I've studied comprehensively, just to read what the blurb says. Hill has the size and physical demeanor to get a quality look from a team as a box safety, but his lack of coverage, quickness, and ball production won't help his chances. Hill will have to open his eyes on special teams and as a lights-out downhill tackler to become an NFL factor. So perhaps they do see him as kind of like a special teamer, backup strong safety type, possible big nickel project there. So they go defensive back with the first 2 of these third-round picks. Delano Hill, somebody, it's going to be fun to get into him as well. You know, with Ethan Pocic, you know, another player that we've not spent too much time on. But yeah, just to repeat what I kind of said before, of all the Michigan defenders that have gone so far, I think it's fair to say that Hill stood out the least when watching them last year.
Just sort of, the Seahawks do have 2 more picks today, and I just find it interesting that, you know, now we're in pick, you know, almost to pick 100. So in terms of NFL.com's big board of the best 150 players in the draft, these are the ones still available that were ranked, you know, in the top 70. So they had number 56, Dorian Johnson, the tackle at Pitt. Number 58, Devon Godot, defensive tackle at LSU. 59, Tedrick Thompson, safety at Colorado. 64, Malachi Dupree, wide receiver at LSU. 65, Samajay Perine, running back at Oklahoma. And 70, Desmond King, cornerback at Iowa. So all of those guys are quote-unquote falling. Notable names could include also Carl Lawson at Auburn, or Josh Dobbs, or Isaac Asiata, or Zach Banner, or Vince Beagle, who had been talked about as, you know, in the second round, maybe sometimes. Rob, as we approach these last picks, are also hearing some of those picks like Dorian Johnson, or Malachi Dupree, or Desmond King. Anybody that stands out in terms of the fallers, or do you think that these guys are, you know, maybe, you know, not that great of a prospects, and it's not that surprising to see them still available?
In some cases, it is. I think it's a bit of a surprise that Cordrea Tankersley's still there. I'm just sort of reading up on what, you know, some of the reaction to.
I don't think Cordrea Tankersley. Oh no, he is still there.
I'm just sort of looking at some of the reaction to this. I mean, Tony Pauline says he loves the pick of Shaq Griffin, tall, fast, and can really cover. Just looking at some of the other. I mean, Charles Davis is suggesting that, you know, they've got a plan for Hill and whether or not he will be someone they even consider at cornerback. And this is interesting because if they viewed Shaq Griffin inside, then the wingspan aspect of it doesn't really come into play that much. Delano Hill has actually got not just 32 inch arms, but he's also got 77.5 inch wingspan. So I just wonder, that's the type of length that they've looked at outside. So I just wonder whether or not Delano Hill could be somebody that they say, okay, we like what he does as a safety. We've got that in a back pocket. We do some special teams. Let's at least see how he does at corner, because he's got this, 4.47 speed as well. Can he handle outside? Can he sort of be a big physical cornerback project for us? That is something they may consider there, Kenny.
And another thing that's being talked about, sort of this year and right now on Twitter, just in terms of the draft, the class in total, is, John Schneider saying that age could play a factor. And Rob, it seems like a lot of these players are on the young side, Malik McDowell, Delano Hill. Are you noticed anything with the age and the youth, and if that's going to be a change? Because, in the past, plus, they, not that they passed on Garrett Bowles, but maybe that was something that would have been a negative to them after all with Garrett Bowles. Do you think there's something to be said about the youthfulness of this class so far?
Maybe. I don't know. That's something that they would have to speak to. It might just be a coincidence. I doubt you. Sometimes, if a player's good enough, he's old enough, and he's young enough, I guess. It's Cordrea Tankersley's just come off the board. He's gone to Miami. That is a really good pick for Miami. This late in the third round, they needed a cornerback. He's got some talent, Tankersley, and in this kind of a range, it's worth a shot. So I think that's a really, really interesting pick for them. A lot of sort of the bigger names have gone now. I'm struggling to think who is left who, is sort of like that big name that people are saying, oh, he's still there. It's been a bit of a drought for the quarterbacks, since the last one was taken. There's a lot of, a lot of the running backs are still there. P. Ryan's still there from Oklahoma. That'll be a little bit of a surprise to some. Just looking at the wide receivers, there's some options there. Whether it's Josh Reynolds, whether it's Joe Chesson, Malachi Dupree is still on the board as well. There's one or two others too. So there's some intriguing options there at receiver. At tight end, Bucky Hodges is still on the board. At least he is. I don't know what the Cardinals pick's going to be here. They're just about to announce it. I find that a little bit. I find it a little bit surprising that Bucky Hodges is still there. And look, you've got George Kittle, you've got Jake Butt. There's some really nice. So they took Chad Williams, Arizona. So, some untapped talent at tight end at the moment. I think that's kind of where one of their next focuses might be. There are some good players there, and the O-line as well. Dorian Johnson, I forgot that he was still there. He's still available late into the third now. Mm-hmm. Syracuse is still there. Asiata's still there. That's some O-line options there.
Taylor
for some value picks. Sorry, go ahead.
It looks like Taylor Moton's also available.
Yeah, some really nice O-line options there.
Just to be clear and updated, in real life, the Seahawks are on the clock.
Okay, and on this, it's the Eagles have just come. I think if people are okay with it, maybe Kenny, we could just ask you to be Roger Goodell from here on in, because but there's 2 more picks to go. 2 more picks to go.
The Titans picked 100, and also the Broncos at 101.
I'm happy for you to. They're just so far behind now. And it's 4:20 in the morning here. So thanks a lot to the NFL Network for delaying this out. I think you'd be better when the Seahawks pick. I think we'll play. I don't think anyone will mind if we play Roger Goodell. If you play, I think you're best cast in the role.
Well, I appreciate it. This is really my dream come true. It's what I've been working for. If you could mute your mic real quick, I will relay the pick as soon as it comes in. The Titans made a took a wide receiver or tight end, and the Broncos took a cornerback. Not one that we've been talking about. If we're getting to that place, I'm just hoping that someone will say the Seahawks pick is not quite in, but they are on the clock, so I can only imagine that it'll come in very quickly. The Titans selecting Jono Smith, so they didn't even take the some of the guys that we've been talking about with Kittle and Butt. And the Broncos, just waiting for their pick, but because I'm refreshing just because these things, the boards move so fast, so it's trying to get there. I can just sort of say when and the Eagles took Rasul Douglas at 99. So there's another cornerback that we've been talking about that was off the board. That was one pick before Jonnu Smith. And then the Broncos went at 101. But Rob, with, we talked about Cooper Kupp joining the Rams. Was there any thought about Chad Williams being a potential threat for the Cardinals?
I think he was a VMAC visitor. Didn't spend a great deal of time looking at him. I think that athleticism of him is kind of a fit for what Arizona has looked for since Bruce Arians took over. They've kind of looked for that kind of like dynamic type of receiver. So he seems to be a good fit for them. I like the fit of Douglas. They're going to need some cornerbacks there. Got Sid Jones a little bit earlier on. They get Rasul Douglas here. And it's going to be interesting because, it's funny because I'd forgotten about a lot of players that were still on the board that you just mentioned a second ago. There are some nice options, some nice values still out there for the Seahawks at some positions that they still do need. So it's going to be interesting to see with these two picks they've got left, the two comp picks that they had. And then, people are unaware they have the fourth pick tomorrow. So there's Green Bay, there's San Francisco, there's Jacksonville, and then there's Seattle on the board in round 4. So they didn't move up. They've not been aggressive this year and moved up to try and get extra picks in that sort of top 50 range. They stayed put, having moved down 3 times from 26 to 35 and acquired a load of picks, and they are spending them. So although John Schneider said, I'm not that crazy about the class compared to last year, and it's thick in some areas and not so much in others, they're going to end up picking a lot of times in this draft. I think it's going to be like 11 or 12 picks in the end.
I'm ready to announce the Seahawks pick. So without further ado, at pick 102, with the 102nd pick of the 2017 NFL Draft, the Seattle Seahawks select Nazir Jones, North Carolina defensive tackle, 6'5", 304 pounds, 34-inch arms.
Okay, a player that, again, you kind of look at him and you think, there are things to like about him. The length, he's incredibly tall, long arms, he's nearly 35-inch arms. A big dude, he's going to come in and he's going to compete interior D-line again. I think he's had some illnesses that are a bit of an issue there. I'm just looking at his numbers now, and I don't know if he had an issue with the combine, but, we're talking about a 24.5-inch vertical here, Kenny. I think I could do that. And nothing really stands out. His short shuttle was pretty good, 4.63 for his size. And I know the Seahawks have put a lot of stock into that. He was kind of like considered more of a power type guy, though. I think this is about plugging the interior. This is about plugging that interior D-line, getting stronger and stouter up the middle. They take Malik McDowell, who's going to play a lot of snaps inside. They've got Jaron Reed. They've got a Taba Rubin. And Nazir Jones might be a hedge for Rubin in the future, if they want to get cheaper there. Maybe a bit of a Tony McDaniel replacement. This could be what the pick is here, a cheaper replacement for Tony McDaniel. But it's interesting, isn't it, that, we talk about what are the Seahawks going to do? Well, they could get a safety, they could get a cornerback, they could get a linebacker, like load up on, replenish the Legion of Boom, set yourself up for the next few years. And that is not what they've done at all. What they are doing with these picks are essentially going again. They're restocking to give the current core another chance to win a title, because this is a player that you want to see come in and compete to play D-line now. This isn't looking down the line. This isn't looking for the next Richard Sherman. This isn't looking for the next Cam Chancellor. This isn't looking for the next Earl Thomas. This isn't looking for great, maybe a potential KJ Wright replacement down the line. This is saying, okay, what do we need? Stouter up front, more pass rush up front. We're going to bolster the defensive line. What else do we need? We need to improve the O-line. They brought in a very versatile offensive lineman. And yep, they have brought one cornerback in and one safety in the late third round. But, it's perhaps not what a lot of people anticipated they were going to do with this draft class.
Yeah, and we're just a couple picks away from just completely wrapping up the Seahawks' new 6 players, barring a trade down or whatever the Seahawks will be picking here in a couple more selections. Nothing left to be spread news-wise here, I think. Just trying to get these last few picks out here before the Seahawks are finished for today, but then they come back on Saturday and pick at the top of round 4, and then they'll get a break until they have 2 picks in 6 and 2 picks in 7. So Jones, like you were saying, and a lot of talk so far here on Twitter, Tony Softly saying he's strictly, this is a nose tackle, just a one, this is his one job. So and the Saints have made their pick at 103, so the Seahawks are on the clock, I believe. So or maybe they're a couple picks after that, but overall we can talk, once they make their last pick, we can just talk about the 6 players as a whole, just sort of say how these guys now line up, because now they've taken 2 interior defensive linemen with Malik McDowell and with Jones. They've taken a cornerback, they've taken a safety, and they've taken a center guard. So in terms of their needs, did they take did they need a cornerback? Did they need a safety? Did they need offensive line help? Did they need defensive line help? Yes. So they've addressed all those needs. Although it's interesting, because even then, when you do look back, as good as the Seahawks have been at drafting, I think relatively, and you go back to, obviously, if you put all this stock in the 2012 class, it's one of the greatest draft classes of all time, easily. And I think 2013 and 2014 weren't very good. And then I think 2015 was pretty good. I think that they've got stuff, and I think they got good things coming out of 2016. But other than 2012, you still look at a lot of those things and you see picks that felt good or okay at the time that turned out not to be, to be that good. Or even ones that didn't feel that great, that didn't turn out. And you're just thinking about the players who never played for the Seahawks, like Garrett Jones. Or I don't know if is that his name? Garrett Jones, Garrett Scott. That didn't quite come out.
Well, I just think it's very interesting to sort of dissect what they're doing, and like I say, you think the direction a team's going to go, and you look at the great defensive backs in a draft and you say, oh, it's a great cornerback and safety draft. That's where there's going to be these great options. And you sort of start to sort of almost talk yourself into, wow, of course they're going to take a cornerback. Of course they're going to do this. Of course they're going to do that. The Richard Sherman trade rumors kind of add a new dimension to it. And you start to think, yeah, maybe they do need to start thinking about life after Sherman, and Cam Chancellor's out of contract next year. And there'll have been many people thinking over the last few weeks, Kenny, that this time next year, Cam Chancellor might not be on this team because he's a free agent. They might have traded Richard Sherman. Who knows what Earl Thomas is going to do? And he may retire. I mean, like he's talked about that. And you've got a few aging bodies on the defensive line. You sort of consider all of those things, and you think, okay, well, they're going to need to start thinking about the future, and they haven't done that. They've added an interior pass rusher, an inside out rusher. They've added a kind of big, 3 technique, Seattle style 3 technique, who plugs space up the middle. They've added a versatile defensive back who can maybe play a bit of corner, but has played safety at Michigan. Frank Clark seems to be very happy about that Delano Hill pick, by the way, on Twitter. And there was obviously no each other from their time at Michigan. And they've taken a big, mature, intelligent offensive lineman. That's what the reports say. So, it's not what was necessarily expected. And there are a lot of players still on the board who would have said if they were there in like round 2 and 3, you'd jump all over them. The Asiatas, the Dorian Johnsons, one or two others as well. That you'd think, wow, if they were there, of course that'd be a great option. And that's not what they've done. That's they've gone a very, very different direction here. So it's going to be very fun especially because there's so many players that are being picked. It's going to be very fun to see what Pete and John say about this class when they do their press conference in a few moments' time, because there's this last Seattle pick which is coming up. You may even know what it is by now, Kenny. And then and look, I mean, they're talking about the fact that the quarterbacks. Ian Rappaport's talking about Nate Peterman and Joshua Dobbs still being available. Maybe that's something the Seahawks consider in this late 3rd or early 4th round. But there's so many good potential contributors still out there that it's going. I'll be very intrigued to see what they say about this draft class when they come and speak to the press in a few moments.
Yeah, the Seahawks are on the clock right now. The 49ers just made a pick. Can I tease that they picked a quarterback? So the Seahawks or the 49ers have a quarterback, a younger quarterback, I guess, to work with. Though a late 3rd round pick, you can't have too high of expectations at that selection if you're trying to build someone. But the Seahawks are on the clock. I think obviously there's a lot of things going on here. But the PFF, the last pick, Delano Hill, safety at Michigan, just a Pro Football Focus report. Some stuff to know, stats to know that Delano Hill ranked 10th in tackling efficiency among all safeties last season. What he does best, physicality, allows Hill to shed blockers outside. Excelled at this one playing press man in the slot. So that's something else to consider. Solid wrap-up tackler. Gave up catches on just 22 of 40 targets with 7 total pass breakups, which is really good. Obviously, once locked into a target on coverage, he'll have the speed to stay and stick. But biggest concerns could include show some stiffness in transition, has a tendency to jump the first move, lacks the elite burst needed to consistently close off from the ball. And, their player comparison is Darian Stewart of the Darren Broncos, saying Stewart is a competent player close to the line of scrimmage, particularly against the run because of his size and physicality. But the further is he off the ball, the more he struggles to close the gap on receivers because he lacks great change of direction and explosion. So maybe another sign there that Delano Hill will be working close to the line of scrimmage and, not through that safety position quite there yet. So with that being said, Seahawks are going to make one more pick here. I haven't been announced it, though. I've just got a new huge burst of new tweets, so that can sometimes signal that something has happened. Seahawks on the clock. Okay, but what was I going to say?
So they're on the clock now?
The Seahawks are on the clock now. It's just kind of confusing to keep up with everything given. Yeah, they're on the clock. I was going to say, I think the story being that Frank Clark mentored Delano Hill in his last year there. Still waiting for the Seahawks last pick here in round 3, and then they'll be picking early up in round 4 on Saturday. The 49ers traded up, I think. Yeah, the 49ers traded up to take C.J. Beathard out of Iowa. If that's not the way you say it, so be it. But they take C.J. Beathard and did not take Josh Dobbs, did not take Brad Kaya, did not take Nathan Peterman. So interestingly enough, not the order of the quarterbacks, and the whole situation with the quarterbacks this year was confusing. But even if you get into that second and third tier, it's still not what a lot of people perhaps expected. Would the Seahawks be taking a quarterback here? Remains to be seen. The cornerback that the Broncos took a little bit ago was Brendan Langley, who was also an impact punt returner. So there's some different things there. But Langley, he's got good size and speed and some of that length. And I think the length thing has become more there. So, Rob, the pick is in for the Seahawks, and I can do a Roger Goodell announcement right here if that sits well with everyone. So if is that good with you, Rob?
Go with it. Yeah, let's have it. Let's go for it.
All right. Its position and team would be expected, but the player not so as expected to me. With the 106th pick in the 2017 NFL Draft, wrapping up their 6 picks on day 2, the Seattle Seahawks select wide receiver Amara Darboh, Michigan.
I knew that was going to be the pick as soon as you said position and team, but not the player. And to be fair, he is very similar to Joe Chesson and had the better year in 2016. He was the one who kind of, when everybody kind of expected that Chesson was going to come on and have a really good final year at Michigan, it was Darboh who ended up having that. He's a grinder, and if you're going to play for Harbaugh, you're going to have to do a bit of blocking. You're going to have to be physical. You're going to compete for the ball. And he was their most reliable and consistent receiver, apart from Jake Butt last year. So interesting pick. They needed to take a receiver at some point, I think, to have a bit of competition there. And I think they probably graded the 2 Michigan receivers very similarly. And they go with Darboh instead. So not a big shock that they've gone in that direction at this point. And that sets it up for the rest of the draft now. I mean, I know they've got sort of later round picks coming up, and they've got this early 4th rounder, but the bulk of the impact has taken place now. We know kind of what this class is going to look like. They've come in here with 6 picks. I don't think many people expected they were going to be spending the 6 picks today. They thought there'd probably be a bit of movement. I was one of those people. Whether they would have gone up and got a Quincy Wilson or somebody, or whether they moved up from Melifonwu or Awuzie, who was there for them anyway. I think that was kind of the expectation, that they were going to end up doing that, and they didn't. They clearly liked the players that were available, and they've taken their players. And I think the good thing is there's a lot of work to do now from my point of view, to go and have a look at Delano Hill, to go and have a look at Nazir Jones, to go and look at Pocic initially, the 3 players that I've watched the least of this group, and break down and work out how they're going to fit into this team. But it seems to me like a group that the statement that the Seahawks are sending us here is not, we're building for next year, the year after, to try and replace some of this core. It's, we want to keep going. We want to be competitive. We want to, fill holes in the defensive line. We want to get another offensive lineman. We want to, add some competition at receiver, a cornerback, safety. That seems to be the message from this group, not we're thinking about the future and replacing our guys. On the one hand, it's positive that they still believe in this group and that they can go on. 2, I guess other people, it will mean that it's a bit of a missed opportunity with some of the options available. But I am not I'm not over, to be perfectly honest, I'm not coming away from this draft class rich with excitement. But then that doesn't have to be the case for this to be a really good class. I'm kind of mostly intrigued to go and get into the tape, Kenny, and see have a closer look at some of the players that we've taken here, and learn more about them, see where they're going to contribute, see what they're going to be able to bring to this team, because it's a class of, I think it's a class of a few surprises. I think the positions they've gone for is a bit predictable, but some of the players that they've taken a little bit surprising and maybe a bit unexpected. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a bad class. And look, people want to see teams built from the inside out, as we've talked about, D-line, O-line, strong in the trenches, and that seems to be what Seattle's mantra has been for the last 2 drafts now, if not 3.
Yep. So that's their last pick, Amara Darboh, of this round, and then they'll be back tomorrow with maybe 5 more picks. That's what they're slated to have. Darboh's family, leaves. And this is from the NFL, his draft profile. Darboh's family left Sierra Leone to avoid war when Amara was very young, coming to America in Des Moines, Iowa, when he was 7 years old, and he only became a United States citizen in September of 2015. So, another good backstory there, which, typically seems to line up with Pete Carroll. His NFL comparison is Mohamed Sanu, which wouldn't be too bad from a player standpoint. But the total draft haul today for the Seahawks, defensive tackle Malik McDowell, center guard Ethan Pocic, and that's a pronunciation that I've gotten off of, I think, his draft profile or off of Twitter, a reliable Twitter source, Pocic. They've taken defensive tackle Naz Jones, wide receiver Amara Darboh, cornerback. I'm trying to do this off the top of my head. Safety Delano Hill, and cornerback Shaq Griffin. So that's their haul for today. And as Rob said, he's going to have to take a closer look. As you would expect, there's a lot of prospects out there. And now that we have locked in on the ones that are actually Seahawks, it's a good time to go back and, sort of dig deeper on who they are. And this is only just the beginning. I do suspect that, as I said earlier, with thinking the Seahawks could trade up and minimize these picks and sort of make maximum value out of it by maybe trading up. I think what obviously happened was John Schneider didn't feel strongly enough, and Pete Carroll didn't feel strongly enough about any of the prospects to trade up for them. Otherwise, I think they would, and I think they're happier to have a bunch of guys that have a certain amount of upside that may lead to greater things. And despite the fact that earlier I said, that they wouldn't necessarily ever cut a 3rd-round pick, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the opportunity, or not like you were looking for an opportunity, but maybe this is such a position where the Seahawks could potentially see them, cut an Amara Darboh, or, and hope that he gets to the practice squad because the competition is deep, or a Naz Jones, where they're really going to make them compete for it, because we're not even done yet. The next player off the board in the 4th round, he's not really any different from Darboh in terms of draft position. So, anything could happen at this point. And Rob, you sort of already have given your sort of initial thoughts, which is, I think that, you're not coming away from this blown away with this class, but what can you say sort of looking at the available players and knowing that the Seahawks will be picking again very shortly? What are your thoughts on the remaining players?
There's a lot of players available, Kenny, that I didn't expect to be there at this point, and that happens every year. You sort of, as soon as you get into sort of that 2nd and 3rd round, you do find that there are names that are very familiar to you that are still around, and I think the O-line's a good example of that. Dorian Johnson's still there, going into the 4th round, bit of a surprise. Nico Siragusa's still there. Again, a bit of a surprise. Isaac Asiatas, even yesterday was being touted as a 2nd-round pick. He's still there in, deep into round 4 now. So if the Seahawks wanted to take another offensive lineman, then there's certainly some potential to do that. D-line, they seem to have pretty covered, but Carlos Watkins is somebody that I thought they might take a look at. Jeremiah Ledbetter is another player on the outside that they might consider. Noble Nwakachu from West Virginia is another defensive lineman that I thought they might show a little bit of interest in. They've not taken any linebackers yet, so that might be something that they're really zoning on in the coming picks. Anthony Walker's still there. Elijah Lee, Jordan Evans, Dylan Cole, Carroll Phillips, Vince Beagle still on the board, Samson Abukum from Eastern Washington. And I think one of the bigger names that's intriguing is Cole Lawson is still on the board. The Auburn pass rusher is still there, deep into the 3rd round, going into the 4th round now. So bit of a surprise there. I think a lot of the good options at cornerback have gone, but keep an eye on Michael Harris from BYU as someone they might take as a bit of a project there. I still like Shalom Luani. I still like Rayshawn Jenkins. There are still one or two other safeties that I like, and P. Ryan's still there as well. So there's and the quarterbacks. So there are plenty of options left. The Seahawks don't have a cluster of picks left now within this draft. They're going to have this pick quite early in the 4th round, and then there's going to be a bit of a wait, isn't there? There's going to be a bit of a wait until round 6. They don't have a 5th round pick. They've got 2 6th round picks, 2 7th round picks to come. I think that the bulk of the class is set up now. That you're not often going to draft guys in round 6. The round 6 and round 7 guys are like priority undrafted free agents. You're taking the positions that you're deep at because you think you might have a hard job convincing them to sign as free agents. So that's kind of what round 6, round 7 is going to be. So we're pretty much one pick away, Kenny, from knowing the sort of thickness of this draft class. And I could sit here and say, "Oh, it's amazing! It's an amazing draft," or something like that. That's not the kind of emotion that I'm emitting from this. It's not a sexy draft class. It's not like a really exciting draft class. It's more of a meat and potatoes draft class. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to get solid. We're going to be stout. We're going to be strong. We're going to be tough, and is a kind of a continuation of that "we want to be the bully again" mentality from a year ago. What it hasn't got, this draft class, is kind of maybe the X factor. That sort of, when you look at the Cardinals and they go Reddick and then Buda Baker, and really sort of zone in on the defense with those 2 picks. When you look at it and what Pittsburgh have done with T.J. Watt and Juju Smith-Schuster, you can kind of look at that and go, oh yeah, that Pittsburgh fans were really excited. They were sticking on the highlights of those 2 guys tonight, feeling really good about where their team is at. And I think a lot of Seahawks fans were like, okay, yeah, there's not too much to get excited about. These guys might work out, but nothing from this draft is getting me out my seat, so to speak. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing, and one of the best bits about doing the draft and covering the draft, Kenny, and having fun with this, is that we see the picks come in, and then you know who the Seahawks have taken, and then you get to go back and watch the videos again and look at them and sort of learn about these players, see how good they are, see how they're going to fit in. And I just can't wait. I mean, as soon as we finish this, it's 4:46. I know I'm going to stick a Malik McDowell game on before I go to bed, and maybe watch a bit of Delano Hill, because you can't help it. And I'll get up tomorrow and I'll be watching Nazir Jones, and it's unfair to judge them without sort of having the proper knowledge. And if they'd have taken certain players today, if they'd have taken, like a Kevin King and Obi Melifonwu, Chidobe Awuzie, we could have talked for a long time with those players. If they took a Shalom Luani, I could have told you an awful lot about him. I can't tell you quite as much about Delano Hill. I can't tell you quite as much about Nazir Jones. So looking forward to getting into the tape, looking forward to studying these guys. And, I'm going to have articles on Seahawks Draft Blog about this, over the next few days, as we kind of break down this class and find out, who these guys are and how they're going to help this team.
It's interesting also just with some of those names that you mentioned as well. And I just we'll wrap up the podcast now. I think my battery's going to die pretty soon here anyway. But one last thought, just being like Thomas Rawls, Frank Clark, Amar Darboh, Malik McDowell, Delano Hill. What do you think is going on there with Michigan and the Seahawks? It seems like that state, and I know that like one thing about the track star that they signed recently, it got me looking into the scout that signed him, and the scout there and I'm just, all the names are not at the top of my head right now or on the tip of my tongue. Just that he had talked about how his area was sort of the middle of the country, Michigan, that type of thing. And it seems like they're really maybe going with this guy, the scout that is leading the charge for maybe some of these picks. But do you find it at all interesting that the Seahawks seem to be heavily invested in what's going on in the state of Michigan, or just a coincidence over the last couple of years?
I think it's just a coincidence. I don't. No, it's not. It's not a coincidence. I think they just have a lot of respect for Harbaugh, and I think even when Carroll was competing with him, and in the USC Stanford days, and then in the Niners Seahawks days, I think it just has a lot of respect for him, as a respect for the way he coaches, the intensity that his team plays with, and perhaps more important than anything else, the ideology is very similar. You know, they want to run the ball, they want to be physical, they want to do the same things on offense and defense, essentially. So I think that's probably what it is. That, you know, I think Jed Fisher was coached with Seattle, is now coaching with Jim Harbaugh, stuff like that. There's a bit of crossover there. I think that's probably one of the main reasons why Harbaugh and Carroll didn't get on for so long, is because they're probably very, very similar. So I think that's one of the reasons why. Malik McDowell obviously doesn't go to Michigan. He went to Michigan State. But also I think the toughness of that conference, it's physical, it's hard-nosed, it's not as fun as maybe the Pac-12 or the SEC, but you know, that you have to be tough to play in that conference, and I think that plays into it as well.
Certainly. So that is this episode of watching the draft and talking about the draft. Tomorrow is day 3, where rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7 will go on, and then undrafted free agency news will come out after that. I think me and Rob will confer and get together sometime after the draft to discuss what the Seahawks did on day 3 and their draft class rookies as a whole. There are 6 new members of the Seattle Seahawks as of now. Day 2 picks, round 2 and 3. And the Seahawks pick again right at near the top of round 4, thanks to some of the moves that they've been making. And so, you know, some more stuff to look forward to with the Seahawks. They've got 4 more picks after that, 2 in round 6 and 2 in round 7. And they seem to be really interested in the guys that will be undrafted or at the end of the 7th round. What with their pre-draft visits that they've had and the meetings they've had, it really seems that they're super into the guys in the middle of the draft, which we've seen, and at the end of the draft, which we'll see tomorrow and through the weekend. So thank you for the people who've been tuning in and listening to us today. You can go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com for Rob's final thoughts on a lot of these players and in a written format, and digging deep into the Malik McDowells and the Ethan Pocics and Delano Hills and whatnot and what have you. You can go to FieldGoals.com. I think we've got about 15 or 20 new articles up today just since the draft started, covering each and every prospect that they've taken, not just that they took them, but a little bit of backstory and upside and downside on each of these players. So if you're listening to this within the live updates thread, I would just ask you to click over to the main page of Field Goals. You can check out everything compiled into that NFL draft section, or just scroll down and see what might interest you in one way or another. So yeah, thank you for listening. This is an episode kind of 3000 NFL mock draft. We have been commentating as we do each year, and thank you for listening. And so tune in. You can subscribe on iTunes through Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur for the next episode, in which we'll dig even deeper onto the next guys whenever that comes out. This has been one edition of the podcast. Stay tuned next time for a brand new draft.